I could not believe what I was seeing. I could have filled the back of his head with 5.56, which is an absolute joke.
Well, it's not an ape, because if the Sasquatch was an ape, we would already have one.
What are these elusive hominids that stalk the wilderness? Your host, two-time witness and field researcher for more than 40 years, William Jevning. Welcome to the mystery. Welcome to Creek Devil.
Hello everyone, welcome to another edition of Creek Devil. Tom, I'm going to have you introduce our guest and kick this off.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey Scott, how you doing today?
I'm doing great, guys. Thanks for letting me be on your show and get my experiences out on here.
Yeah, well, you and I talked the other day, and you had some really interesting experiences. One of them, I believe, was in the UP, Michigan UP.
No, it was in a town called Mayville, and it was actually in the thumb of Michigan. It wasn't up in the UP. I'd never hunted up in the UP. I had several chances to go up there, but I heard the deer hunting up there sucks. So I'm a big deer hunter, so I'm a big buck hunter, buck killer. So I like to go where there's great big bucks, like Ohio, here in Indiana where I live. There's not a lot of big bucks up in Michigan, actually, but up in the UP they're kind of scarce, and a lot of deer up there. They have a lot of harsh winters, so a lot of them don't make it. Their rack size isn't very big because of the nutrition, because there isn't really any up there on what they eat. So I just mainly hunted around my house and then over by Mayville on a friend of mine's property.
Tell us about that first encounter that you had. That was pretty interesting.
Well, it was in November, and I can't remember the exact day because it was, 21 years ago, but I know it was during the time when there was no moon phase. All the moon phase was out, so it was completely dark out. There was no moon shining in the woods or anything I was hunting, and to kind of set this up, the woods I was hunting was, I don't know how many acres it was, but it went for about 6 or 7 miles, so it was a pretty big chunk of land. But I only hunted about 250 acres of it, because that's all the landowner, that's all he owned of it. And I was the only person who was allowed to bow hunt it. Nobody else was allowed to be back in there. Then he owned property across the road as well, and his cousin hunted over there. I didn't hunt over on that side. I just stayed over by myself. And so anyways, it was about an hour, as the crow flies, about an hour, 45 minutes from my house. So I would have to get up pretty early to get over there, because I always like getting in the woods in the dark. If you guys have deer hunted, the best time is to get in there and get situated before first light, because a lot of bucks come back to their bedding areas, and that's the best key time to, pop one of them and get one of them. So I got to the landowner's property really early in the morning. It was pitch dark out. He had one light for the property. I always parked over by it so I could kind of see what I was doing. Are we still good?
Yeah, we're good.
We are 100%.
Okay. So I got to the property. I got out of my car. When I got out of my car, I had to go over on the other side to get all my gear out, my bow and everything. And I really noticed that it was really super quiet. I mean, now I've hunted out in the woods before and it's been, quiet, but not like this. This was like, you could hear the ringing in your ears, it was like really eerie. And I'd never experienced that before, ever in my life. Last year was 30 years for me being in the woods hunting. So I've done this for quite a long time. I've hunted all over Ohio, Wayne National Forest, and the southernmost part of Ohio. Here in Indiana, I hunt a couple properties, and then Michigan. So I've been hunting a lot of areas for quite a long time. So when I got there, it was like really, really quiet. And I couldn't get past that. Like I'd never experienced that. But I thought, oh, well, Bigfoot wasn't on my mind back then. You know what I mean? I remember growing up watching Leonard Nimoy in Search Of with a lot of other people. I remember seeing the Patty video and thinking, well, that could be real. I've always had an open mind to life. I mean, this is a big world. I mean, anything can happen. And I remember seeing that and thinking, well, that could be real, but that's out on the West Coast. That's out in British Columbia. That's out in Alaska. I mean, it's not Michigan. You know what I mean? Because I didn't know anything about the subject really, other than seeing that video. I didn't know anything about it. I mean, I think I told Tom when we talked, I think internet at the time was dial-up and it was real slow. And, it wasn't like I was researching Bigfoot online or anything. You know what I mean? I've hunted a long time. I've found tree breaks, a lot of tree breaks, hunting the different areas I've hunted. I've ran across them, but at the time, I didn't know what they were really, because like I said, I wasn't really into Bigfoot. I wasn't researching it. I can remember being in the 7th grade and getting a book on the Loch Ness Monster, on Sasquatch, and a bunch of other things. And I remember seeing a tree, I think it's in Alaska, that was tore out of the ground and the root and everything and was shoved in the ground. And there's a famous picture of it. So that's all I really knew about Bigfoot. So when I got this property, I got out, was kind of eerie quiet. I'm like, well, I guess this is just how it is. So I'm going to start down my way into the woods. So the landowner, he lived about 50 foot above the bottom of the woods. So you would have to walk down this 2-track and it would circle around behind his property and then eventually go in the woods. And then when I got in the woods, I had to turn again to the right and I was facing south. So I would go down that 2-track and then it would stop and then it would turn left. And it would run, I don't know, 2-3 miles back in the woods. You could drive a 4-wheeler or whatever. You could drive east through the woods for a pretty good chunk of area. So I would take a left and I would walk about 7, 8, 9 steps. And then there was a game trail that butted into the 2-track. And that game trail is what I would turn right. Now I'm facing south again. And I would take that on back to my stand, I don't know, 150, 200 yards back in there. And I hunted what you call a bull. We call them ridges here, but people out west call them bulls. But I was kind of like in the middle of the bull. And then behind my tree, it went up to a ridge about 25 feet high. So I was 20 feet up in the stand, but it's 25 feet. So I can see to the top of the ridge, but I can't see over the other side. And I'll get to that here in a second too. So I started down that game trail and I took, I don't know, 12 or 14, 15 steps. And, I got a flashlight on my thigh, which I always do when I walk in the woods in the dark. So I can roll it left or right and I can see the floor of the woods or the forest, whatever I'm in. So I don't trip over something and fall on my keister. So, but I stepped on that twig and it made a cracking noise. And when I did, something to my right about 25 yards or so got up. And when it got up, it made so much noise getting up because there was a lot of leaves on the floor. There was a lot of foliage on the floor. So it was hard to get back in the woods and be quiet even when you were walking. You know what I mean? You'd have to walk a little bit, stop, walk a little bit, stop. So, you didn't spook any deer because I've bumped deer in the dark before. And when they pop up and they go busting down through the woods, they'll stop. And when they find out that you're a predator, they start blowing and snorting all over the place. This thing got up, again, made a bunch of noise, and I froze, and I was bent over. Now, I'm sitting there as it got up, and I'm bent over, and my mind's telling me, Scott, stand up, straighten up. And I couldn't straighten up. I was just froze because this thing took 5 steps to my right and went in behind me and stopped. So now it's on the game trail about 17 steps from me, and it just stops and it's standing there. And I can't see it. I can't see my hand in front of my face without pulling the flashlight up. And I'm like, do I shine my flashlight behind me and see what the heck it is? Or do I just stand here? I didn't really know what to do, but it just was, the thing of it is when it walked like me. That's the characteristic that I couldn't wrap my mind around, because it's like, is there somebody else in the woods here that I don't know about? I'm the only person allowed to hunt here. So I heard it walk, but every time it took a step, it was cracking everything like it had great big feet. So it went in behind me and it was standing, and I'm standing there, and it seemed like it was 5 minutes. It probably was a minute. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to start walking to my stand, because I got to get to my stand, because this is kind of creeping me out. So when I would start to walk, it would start to walk. Now it's going east. I'm going south. So I would take 4 steps. I would stop, and it would take 1 more step. Like, it didn't know when I was going to stop. But the crazy thing was, it was trying to be stealthy and quiet. It was trying to move when I moved. So I couldn't really hear what it was doing over what I was doing, because it was so noisy. But I could hear it cracking and popping sticks everywhere it walked. So I did it again. I took 5 steps, stopped. It took 1 more step. And then I would stand there, and it would stand there. Now, there was no noise from it. There was no huffing or growling, or there was no infrasound. There was no telepathic thing in my head. I've heard other people talk about that. It was just standing there really quiet. So I did it 1 more time, and I stopped, and it took 1 more step. Now I'm sitting there in the dark, pitch black. I can't see. All I hear is this thing over to my left. And the hair started to stand up on the back of my neck, and I started to get goosebumps, just like I'm getting right now, because every time I tell this, it's like I'm right back there again. And so I'm like, screw this. I'm going to run the rest of the way up over the ridge to my stand. I'm getting out of here. So I took off running. And when I took off running, it took off running. And the thumping noise it made every time, the footfall of it, it was so loud. It was just a big thump every time it took a step. And there was 5 or 6 seconds in between each step. So I knew it was taking big strides. So I'm like, what the hell is this thing, man? Never had Bigfoot in my head, anything like that. But I got down to my stand, and it was still running. And I dropped my flashlight a couple of times. I picked it up. I'm scrambling to get my bow hooked up. I climb up in my tree. By now, it's starting to slow down, and it's in the swamp. And I got up in my tree, hooked my safety harness on, and I just sat there and listened. I'm listening to it walk in the swamp, and it's breaking trees, and like it's pushing trees over and branches and walking through this stuff, because it's thick in the swamp. I've actually been in there, but it goes out away from me, probably, I don't know, 80 to 100 yards. And I'm sitting there and I'm listening, and all of a sudden it stops. And I'm like, what the heck? What the heck was that? Then all of a sudden I hear crack, crack, pop, pop, crack, pop. It starts breaking these limbs off this tree. And I know they got to be big limbs, because it sounds like a stick of dynamite going off when it's doing it. And you can hear it. You can hear it cracking the tree limb and twisting it. And I'm like, got my face in my hands going, is this really happening to me? Am I really hearing this? Is this really going on? And I'm thinking, you got to have hands to do that. And there's nothing in here that has hands. I'm the biggest predator in here. I weigh 213 pounds. I'm about 5'8" and a half. You got deer in there, 140, 160 pounds, maybe 180. You might get a big old wily buck that maybe is over 200, but I'm pretty much the biggest predator. I mean, I don't have elk. I don't have Kodiak bear or grizzlies. I don't have moose. I don't have caribou. I have nothing in there that weighs over 500 pounds. And this damn thing sounded like it was 600 to 1,000 pounds. When it started running, man, I was like, it blew my mind. Because first it was fast and agile, but I could hear it taking big strides. The thumps were so paused out, so many seconds in between each one, that I was like, it blew my mind. And when it started breaking the trees, I just kept saying to God, please don't let this thing come back. Please, because I was scared to death it was going to come back. In fact, when I was standing on the game trail and it was standing right behind me in pitch black, I thought, I'm going to die right here. This thing's going to come down this game trail. It is going to sweep me up and it's going to carry me out of here, or it's going to tear my head off or whatever, because it sounds huge. And so I usually got down out of my tree about 9:30 if I didn't see anything. I sit up there till 11:30 because I was scared to death. I've been scared before, but I was like frightened in this whole thing. And I mean frightened. So I've never felt that before. So I got down, I got all my gear together, got my bow. I went up over that ridge. I went down that game trail. I got to that up the 50 foot. I got to my car. I threw my stuff on my car, and I didn't even talk to the landowner. I got out of there and went home. And I was scared to death. And I didn't go back there for about a month and a couple weeks. I was married at the time, and my ex kept asking me, why aren't you going hunting? Why aren't you going over to Mayville? How come you're not hunting beyond the house? And I had to think of an excuse because I was terrified. And that's basically what happened to me in Michigan.
Scott, let me ask you this real quick. You run from this thing, you can tell it's a huge creature. You get up in your tree stand. What happened then? Did you hear anything else? Was there any more sound?
No, I heard it walk out away from me. It was going like southeast from what I could gather in the dark. And then I heard it break. I mean, I wish I could have recorded it breaking the tree. It was tearing this tree apart. And I'm not kidding you. I mean, tearing it apart. It was so loud. And this is when I realized this thing's really powerful because it's ripping limbs off a tree. Okay. And it's like, then after it did that, I heard it take a few more steps, and then I couldn't hear it no more. And then I waited for daylight. I didn't see any deer or anything. And then I got down and I made my way the hell out of there. And I told a friend of mine years later, because I didn't tell anybody about this for 3 years. I didn't want anybody to think I was nuts and crazy. It's the same thing everybody says, but when you're in the moment and you have that happen, you don't want anybody to think you've lost it. And when you tell somebody this, they're rolling their eyes or they're smiling or laughing or, Bigfoot's a big joke and we got messing with Bigfoot and Slim Jim commercials and all that stuff. And I think it's more in this country of a joke, except for the people that go through this kind of stuff, because there's no joke. Because I know what I heard in that woods. I couldn't see it, but I never knew they slept on the ground. Years later, Melba Ketchum's got video of one sleeping on the ground. I don't know if it's really real. I wasn't there, but I saw the video. I didn't even know they slept on the ground. I didn't know if they were real. Where they slept, if they were in caves underground. I knew nothing about it. Like I said, when I was going out to deer hunt, I was going out to deer hunt, not to do anything else. But I went home. And I was there for a month and a couple weeks. And I remember I couldn't sleep one night. And I got up and went out in my living room and I just sat there. And I was like, you got to get back over there, Scott. You got to get back over there and get in there and face this, because otherwise you're going to sell all your stuff. You're going to quit hunting. And I have a real passion for this. I look forward to it every year. I have a couple friends in Ohio I hunt with and I went to high school with, and there's a lot of camaraderie along with it. And plus I'm pretty good at it. So I just said, I got to go back over there and I got to get in there and I have to just face this. So I got back in there, but I would never go back in the dark. I'd go in at first light. And when it was starting to get dark, I would say, okay, this is my cue. I'm getting out of here. So I hunted in there for 3 more years. I hunted in there till 2003. Excuse me. I'll tell you, I would get in there. I would get up my tree. I'd hook everything up, sit down, get ready. I probably missed a lot of deer by doing this because I was too afraid to go in the dark because this really rattled me. And I've never been like this before in my life, ever before this. I always went in the woods in the dark and I was excited. And so it kind of really rattled me. So I would get in there, get up in my stand. I'd be sitting there and all of a sudden I'd hear a tree knock way out to the south of me. And I mean, it sounded like it was hitting a tree and whatever it was hitting it with would explode. I mean, it was really loud. And then, 10 minutes later, I'd hear a big tree knock to the north. And it's like about every time I go in there, I would hear it. And it would always just be one knock. Well, I listened to some other people that have been field researchers, and they said in their podcast that sometimes Sasquatch they'll do however many people are in the woods that they know or sense or whatever, they'll do that many knocks on a tree to let the other one know how many people are in it. Now, I don't know if that's true, but it would always be one knock with me. And then, I would hear a whoop every once in a while in the swamp. And I would be like, did I just hear a whoop? I thought I heard a whoop. And I would be real quiet and listen. And then I wouldn't hear nothing. And then the really creepy thing is over the ridge behind me, I would hear whistling. My girlfriend is a bird nut. So I kind of imitated the bird or the whistle I heard. And she's like, oh, that's that kind of bird. I said, no. You don't understand. This was like something with big lungs, and it was louder than what a bird would do it. Like when birds whistle, you can hear, but it's kind of faint. This was like real strong, like a bad human trying to do it or whatever. But, it would, I'll see if I can do it. It was like, I can't do it. And that's what I would hear over the ridge. And I would hear it to the right of me, and then I would hear it to the left of me. And then I would hear it to the right, and I would hear it to the left. I would never hear it in the middle. It was always far to the right or far to the left.
Let me interrupt you for just a second. Hey, Will,
Sure.
Is this anything that you've ever heard before or experienced?
Actually, I had another witness that imitated that and sounded exactly the same.
Yeah, and you know what? I'll tell you something. Like who's over the ridge whistling? I've never seen anybody in here. I'm the only person allowed to hunt it. But I would hear that, every couple times I was out there, I would hear it. And I couldn't see over the ridge. I thought a couple times about going up the ridge, getting down, going up the ridge to the top to see if I could see what it was. But then, after this whole thing in the dark, it was like, no, I'm not going to do that. But it would be so loud that I would get up in my stand and turn around and face the ridge, and I would look around the tree because I'd be hearing it. And I'm like, I cannot see this. It's driving me crazy. But, things like that went on. When they were there, I think it was more than one. I think it was 2 or 3. But when they were there, the weird thing is there were no birds. There were no squirrels. There were no coyote, no raccoon, no turkeys. There was turkeys all over the property. I mean, you couldn't walk in the woods without a turkey that was roosting up the tree fly out. And I don't know if you've ever heard a turkey take off from a tree. It's loud because they got big wings, and that will make your heart jump out of your chest in the dark. Yeah, I would hear this, and I very seldom ever saw deer. If I'd hear them tree knocks, I was screwed for the day. I mean, I knew it, like, I'm not going to see anything. They're here. And it's really weird because in 2002, I shot an 8-point buck. He came in, and up in Michigan, you could bait. So I had a bait pile. I was right almost over the top of it, and I had a buck come in. I didn't hear him that day, but I had a deer come in. I shot him, and he ran out to the north. So I waited, like maybe 45 minutes. I thought I got a pretty good hit on him. So I got down, I found my arrow was broken in half, and I started trailing the blood. And I walked down through here, and I'm going north just on the outside of the swamp. Because the swamp was like real thick, and then it would open up into like an opening where it was kind of clear. I remember looking up and I saw a tree break, and the tree break was, I couldn't reach it. It was probably, I would say 7 foot up in the air, and the top of the tree was broke over. And I'm like, God, I've seen this before. Hunting all these years, I've seen this exactly. You know, this must be something that they do. Because at that time, like I said, 2003, I wasn't online looking for Bigfoot, whatever. I was just trying to get past it in my head and get past the fear of it, which I still think to this day I have PTSD. Now, I've not had any nightmares about Sasquatch. I go back in the woods in the dark now, and it's like, I got to really push myself to go in. When I go to Ohio and hunt with my buddies, and we all separate to go where we're going to sit in the woods, I got to really push myself, because it's in the back of my mind all the time. I hear the footsteps. I hear it running. You know what I mean? So it's always on me. But I don't want to get off course here. But I found a tree break, and then then I'm trailing the blood, and I go about another 70 yards, and I look over, and there's another tree break. And then I go about another, I don't know, 60, 75 yards, and there's another one. And now I'm to the fire lane, or the fire road. And this deer has went across the fire road, and I didn't have the okay to go across there to go into that. So I had to get permission. So then it was getting later in the evening, and it's like, okay, I got to go in here and try and find this deer. So I'm going in there, and there were tree saplings that were broke and twisted and broken off and just hanging. And then I found another tree break. And then the weird thing is, I could see a big pile of blood where the deer had laid down. And I knew this deer was dead, because he bled out. And I was using big broadheads at the time, and I got him right behind his shoulder, but he was kind of angling a little bit towards me. But I know, if anything, I got a liver shot, and I knew this deer was dead. I never found the deer. There was a couple more drops, and then nothing. And I went for 100 yards in circles all around where I found that less blood, and I couldn't find the deer. It was like it just disappeared. It was gone. The other time I had a deer come in, I shot a 7-point, and it ran into the swamp. And I'm like, oh, Lord God, I got to go in that swamp and get that deer. And this was at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. So I sat there till about 2:30. I got down. I walked back in there. You had to crawl through some of these places because it was so thick. And there was blood up on the trees, and I'm like, oh, that looks like a hard shot. This deer's dead. So I walked back there. I find the deer. It's kind of got its rack into some tree limbs. It passed away like that. So when I get to the deer, I'm like, well, I got to get this deer out of here. So I would walk up in the swamp about 20 yards. I'd set my bow down. Then I would go back and grab the buck by the rack, and I would drag it up to my bow, and so on and so on and so on. Well, as I'm doing this, I start hearing a whoop. I start hearing a whoop over here. I start hearing a whoop behind me. And I'm like, oh my God, they're in here somewhere, and I can't see them. So I started to panic a little bit. So I took that deer, and I dragged that deer through the swamp, and I got him up to the base of my tree. And I've never done this in all the years I've hunted. I was so freaked out that I left that deer under that stand. And I was like, you know what? If you guys want this deer, you can have it. I'm getting the hell out of here. And I got all my gear, and I left that deer. I didn't even tag it. Now, I could get in a lot of trouble for that, but I went home. And when I was home that night, I called a buddy of mine, and I said, CJ, I shot this deer, and I said, I really want to go in and get it. And I was wondering if you'd help me drag it out. I didn't really need him to help me drag it out, because at the time I was in my 30s. I could drag a deer out, but I wanted him there for comfort if anything happened. So he didn't really know what he was getting into, but he's like, yeah, I got my van. We'll put some plastic down. We'll go over and get it. So the next day we went over there in the afternoon, and we got down to it. And I really thought the deer was going to be ripped in half, or the hindquarters were going to be gone, because I've heard other guys say that's what's happened to them out in the Midwest. I get up over that ridge, and there's my deer laying there. and it hasn't been touched. So I'm thinking, oh, awesome. I'm going to get this deer, and I'm going to get it field dressed, and we're going to get the hell out of here. So he helped me drag it up over the ridge. We got down the trail a little way that I walk in on, and I said, okay, CJ, now I'm going to field dress this deer, and I want you to do something for me. He's like, sure, what? And I said, I want you to look in 180-degree radius to 360. And he goes, what? I said, I want you to look around in like a 360. Just look around while I'm gutting this out. I don't want any coyotes coming in. You know, I tried to think of an excuse, you know what I mean? So I field dressed that deer the fastest I've ever field dressed a deer. I'm not kidding you. I mean, I was in, had the inners out, and I'm like, let's go. And we drug that deer up to that 2-track, and we drug it all the way up to his van. We threw it in his van. We got in his van, and we left. And I was like, it was like a big sigh of relief for me. And this is what I was going through, you know, up till 2003. The last time I hunted there in 2003, I'm going to say it was December, because it was pretty cold. And I'd sit up there, you know, all I could sit. And, it, you know, when the sun starts going down, you got this pink sky, and it's, you know, it's my cue. Okay, I got to get down and get out of here. So it wasn't real dark in the woods, but it's kind of like, you know, you can only see maybe 100 feet around you, maybe 150 feet. And then you got to use a flashlight. And I had a pretty powerful, small little flashlight. And I got all my gear. And this is the thing out of all this that really freaked me out. I get all my gear. I go up over the smallest part of the ridge. I'm walking down the game trail, and there were pine trees and pine needles all over this property. Okay. So in some spots it was quiet. I get down the game trail, 15, 16 steps, and a rock hits me in the back, right in my left shoulder, hit me in my back. And it fell down on my left-hand side, and I popped my flashlight on, and I looked at it. And I'm like, wow, that's like a little rock. I'm like, that hit me in the back. And I was right next to a pine tree. And they always say, you should never look up. I was so scared to look up into that pine tree because I didn't know if one of these things was up in the pine tree. I don't know. But I did. I turned my flashlight on and I looked up there and I saw nothing. It was a big sigh of relief. So then I start walking again. I walk about another 10 steps. Another rock hits me in the back. I have it today. I have it right here. I could have showed you it if we were on the video part, but it hits me in the shoulder blade and almost hit me in the same spot. And I stop and I take my flashlight and I go real slow. And I turn around and I go in a 360 and I'm looking for eye shine. I'm looking for something, something to show itself because, okay, you can do all this whooping and whistling and tree knocks, but now you're throwing rocks at me and you're hitting. And now, you've broke my space of comfortability. And this is really freaking me out because I'm actually having something throw a rock at me and I can't see it. And I'm going back and forth really slow. And there's nothing there. I didn't see anything, nothing. And I'm really diligent and I'm real slow and I'm really looking because I'm saying to myself, if something peeks out around a tree, I'm out of here. I'm going to drop everything. And I don't care if I leave it here and never come back. I'm getting the hell out of here. But there was nothing. So I bent down and I picked the stone up. It's about the size of a stone, I guess. So I go walking on down the trail. I get to the 2-track. And I said in my mind, this is what I said. Okay, guys, you can have this place. I'm going home and I'm never going to return here. I'm never coming back. You can have all of it. I'm out of here. And I got on that 2-track and I had nothing else happen. Nothing. I went up that 2-track. I threw my stuff in my car. I didn't say goodbye to the landowner. Nothing. And the landowner and I were, we were pretty good friends, him and his wife. They were nice people. And I got in my car and I got the hell down the road and I got the hell out of there and I've never went back.
Hey, Scott, have you ever talked to the landowner since this episode?
No. Nope. No, I never called them. I sent them a Christmas card once, thanking them for letting me hunt there. But I never went back or called them or asked them if they ever seen anything or heard anything. I wanted nothing to do with it because by that time, I mean, when them stones got thrown at me, that was it for me. That was it. I was done. You know, I'm because I think they're very inquisitive. I think that the reason why they throw rocks or they throw rocks in water or whatever, I think it's part intimidation, but I think it's part inquisitive. I think they want to see what our reaction is to it. They want to see the reaction on our face. You know, I mean, they might be clowning around because most of the people I've heard that have had rocks thrown at the house or on the roof or towards their direction, it's always 3 foot away. And these aren't big rocks. It's just a little stone. It hit me twice. So I don't know if they were getting ready to show themselves to me and they were trying to get close to me to maybe not freak me out, if maybe the following year I was going to actually see one because, you know, now I'm in there 3 years. I know they've seen me shoot deer. I know they've seen me harvest deer. You know what I mean? But it was just really weird. Really, really, really weird. I've never had anything like and I've been out a lot and, you know, I've never had anything throw anything at me. You have to have hands to do that. You know, a deer isn't going to do that. A raccoon, a coyote, you know, those animals are the ones that are in there that I know of. And you have to have hands to do that. So it freaked me out. Definitely.
I was going to say, yeah, when they mean business when the rocks get bigger. I talked to a guy here in Oregon almost 2 years ago who had some large grapefruit sized rocks thrown at him and his dog. And,
wow.
And that's serious stuff. Yeah, but even little ones, no thanks.
Well, I heard that they don't like dogs. I don't know if they have a fear of them or if they just don't trust them. I don't know. But I never had anything like this happen to me. I mean, the whole thing in the dark was scary enough. That was terrifying. But when I'm walking, going to go home and things are in my mind about what I got to do when I get home and a rock hits me in the back. And then I look down and I see it. And then, you know, or a stone, I guess I should say. And then I walk, you know, some more steps and I get hit almost in the same spot. And this one's thrown a little harder. It kind of stung a little bit. So I don't know if I was farther away from them. I don't know, but it just freaked me out. And I was working at a hospital at the time, and I had a Native American friend, and he worked there also. And we worked in security, so we would have to work 2 weekends out of the month, and we'd have 2 weekends off. So we usually worked together. So I was sitting there talking to him one day, and because he's Native American, I thought, okay, I'm going to pitch this at you. And I want to see what you think. So I told him pretty much all of it, but I didn't tell him it was me because I didn't want him to think, you know, maybe he doesn't believe in Sasquatch, even though he's a Native American. Maybe he thinks the whole subject is stupid or whatever. So I told him it happened to someone else. And when I told him about the stone or the rock hitting, and I said, you know, he picked the stone up. He's like, whoa, wait a minute. Back the bus up. He picked the stone up? And I said, yeah, he picked the stone up and took it with him. I think he has it today. He said, oh, no. He said, you don't do that. And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, my people or my tribe believes that if you touch anything that a Sasquatch touches, it connects you to them supernaturally or spiritually because they're people and they have spirits. And I'm like, really? And I'm thinking to myself, oh, Lord God, you got to be kidding me. Because who am I to say to him, oh, I don't believe that. Your people are crazy. You know, who am I to say that? I don't know. I don't know anything about this subject. I'm not a field researcher. I'm a deer hunter and I love deer hunting. Am I going out looking for these things? Nope. Am I gifting them? Nope. Am I trying to find one? Nope. I just want to deer hunt and be left alone. I've never heard any kind of rock clapping or I don't know what they call it, clacking or I've never heard that. Or I heard some of them do something with their mouth and it sounds like a tree knock. I don't know. I really don't know. I mean, now I know a lot about the subject because years later, after my second experience happened with one, I really started digging deep into it because I had something that happened to me in Indiana over here on my girlfriend's mom and dad's property, and it was scary too.
Okay, yeah, let's hear about that.
Okay, well, her mom and dad live about an hour from us. So 2015, I was hunting over there, and it was during rut, and I saw some deer, and I was at the far end of the woods. So their woods is east and west, okay? The length of the woods is east and west, and then the thickness of the woods is north and south. That gives you any kind of bearings. And there's stands all over this property, and they got about a 350 yard open field. Okay. I found a couple tree breaks in there after this. Actually, last year I found a couple, but I'll get to that in a second. But I was sitting at the very far east part of the woods in the corner, and I was sitting up on the outside of the woods on the very corner on a tree. And I saw some deer, but I didn't get a shot or anything. And the sun was starting to go down, and, you know, you got a pink sky again. And I'm like, well, you know, I'm spending the night here. So, you know, there's always tomorrow. It's almost kind of getting too dark. I'm going to get down, get my gear, and I'm going to get to the house. Now, the house was, from where I was sitting, the house sits at the west end of the property. And it's probably, I don't know, it's probably 300 and some yards across, and it's probably 150 yards long. So I had about 150 yards to the front of the yard to the house that butts up against the field. So I get, you know, on my gear, I climb down, and I go out about 50 yards from the edge of the woods out into the field, and it's a bean field. So they hadn't been harvested yet, and there's beans everywhere. So I go out in this field, and I take a right, and I'm starting to walk down towards the house. And if you guys have hunted or anything, when you're in the woods, light escapes the woods. So it's darker on the inside than it is on the outside. So when you get, when you get out of the woods, it gets light again, because the sun's still up. So I'm walking down that field, and all of a sudden to the right of me, in the back corner of the woods is probably, I don't know, 35, 40 acres thick from north to south. So I hear from the corner of the woods something walking towards me bipedal, like a man or something. But it sounded like it had a heavy footfall to it. It sounded big. And I stopped in the field, and I'm looking over to my right because I'm waiting for somebody to pop out of the woods. Nobody's popping out of the woods because I was going to tell them, hey, you got to get off here. You don't have any okay to hunt here. So this thing's coming at me in the woods, and all of a sudden it stops. And I'm flashing back to 2000 because it sounds just like what I heard in 2000 when it was walking around behind me. And it stops inside the woods. Now I'm really squinting because I'm trying to see on the inside of the woods because I can't see. It's now dark in the woods, and it's getting dark outside. And all of a sudden it lets out this scream. And I mean, it lets out a scream. I mean, a loud scream. I didn't even think. I just reflexed, and I went down on one leg in the bean field. For some reason, I wanted to get as low as I could. I didn't want this thing trying to see me or whatever it is. And the beans are like up where my eyes are. And I'm like sitting down, like on one knee going, what the hell is this, man? It just let out this big, huge scream. I've never heard this before. Then, it seemed like 2 or 3 minutes, is probably a minute. It let out not a roar, not like a lion or anything. It let out this huge howl. I mean, really loud. It was so loud that I had to cup my hands to my ears because it was hurting my ears. because I was only 75 yards away from it. And I dropped my bow and cut my ears, and I could still hear it with my ears cut. And I grabbed that bow, and you know how the old cartoons used to be, where if somebody was scared, their feet would move before their body, and their body would go after their feet. Dude, it was like I was shot out of a cannon. I was running for my life. And as I'm running, this thing's still howling. I mean, it was huge. And when I got to the edge of that property, I dropped my bow and turned around, and it stopped and it echoed. Now, look, man, I'm not in Oregon. I'm not anywhere where there's any mountain range. But this thing echoed.
Yeah, no, I've heard all sorts of howls. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Well, it was kind of like that, but I was trying to think of something that it was close to, and the only thing I could come up with was it was like an air raid siren. It started out real low and went really loud and high. And it was kind of like a tornado siren down at a park. When it starts up, it's got that kind of growl, real loud. It was loud. And I stood there and I'm like, you know what? If this is what I think it is, it's starting to get dark. I'm standing here. I'm gonna watch this thing walk out. I want to see it. I got enough guts up. I wanted to see it after going through this. And I never heard it. It never went out in the field. I never heard another step. It's like it just went silent. Nothing. And I mean nothing. And I'm like, you got to be kidding me. Because as loud as it was coming through the woods, it sounded like it was a giant. Every foot it put down, I could hear it clear back from the corner. Because when I first started hearing it, I popped my head to the right and I could hear it coming. And after it did the second one after me, that was it. I got my bow. I went in, up past the house. I threw all my stuff in the trunk. I got in my car. I didn't even spend the night, and I went home. Last year, I go out to get my stand ready because I have a stand in there also on the edge of the woods, down from where I was, west. I was farther east, but my stand is in the west. So I go in there, I'm checking my trail cam and everything, and I look over, and there's this tree with this big branch, and it's just broke like a tree break. Now, this branch it's got to be 11, 12 inches, and it's about 9 feet off the ground, and it's just broke and hanging like you would see a tree break, but it's like a supersized tree break. And then I go out of the deer trail past my stand, and there were 3 trees, okay? And they hung down in front of me. They had branches. And if a deer walked along the edge of the field, along the edge of the woods, I either had to shoot, I had a window to shoot on the left side of it if I was facing the field, and I had a window to shoot on the right side of it. I would have to wait for that deer to clear because all them branches were hanging down. So I go out there last year, and I walk out, and I didn't even notice it at first. I look up, and all the branches that were in my way were all broke. And they were broke like a tree break, or kind of broke and twisted. And one of them, it's like something grabbed a hold of it, broke it, and pulled down on it. And the bark of the tree went down, peeled it off the tree, and the tree limb's just hanging. Now, what windstorm's going to do that? And that was about 11 foot up, those branches. And they were all broke in front of my stand, almost like something was telling me, I don't want you hunting here. I broke all these, and because my stand's directly behind them, right up on the edge of the woods. And I had pictures of them, and I sent them to a couple other people, and they were like, that's really fascinating. But, I mean, I have found them. But like I said, I've seen tree breaks, 12 years ago. I saw tree breaks in Ohio running through a woods, but I didn't know what they were. And Bigfoot didn't connect with me that's what they are, but I found a lot of them. Now, if I find one, I'm minding my surroundings. I'm really watching what's going on because, like I said, now I'm going back in the woods in the dark. So it's scary.
Scott, are these deciduous trees, like hardwood, or are they more of a fir type tree? I'm just curious. It doesn't make a difference, but I'm just curious.
Oh, they're hardwood. They're hardwood. And they're pretty thick trees. Like, they're probably, I don't know, 24 inches around. They're pretty big trees. But I went out there and saw that, and I'm like, immediately I started looking for footprints, because on the outside of the woods, it's kind of like a sandy dirt base. So if something walked across there, it would be perfect tracks, because it would sink way in. But I couldn't find any footprints or anything. But it was really weird. I have trees all over my property, and when a windstorm comes through, it almost like spruces the trees or takes care of them. All the little branches fall out. They can't handle the hard, heavy winds, and they break off. But I don't see any big limbs crack or broke or hanging over or twisted. I've never seen a windstorm do that. It doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah, no, it doesn't. I've seen, Will, you've seen plenty of that, where you see a break and everything else around it is just fine. And I think anybody listening has gone out and seen what the streets look like and your backyard looks like after a windstorm. All the dead branches and the weak ones have been, like you said, have been kind of pruned away. But it's not this very deliberate type of break that you see with the tree breaks.
Yeah, and the funny thing is we had this winter, like a rain snowstorm and freezing rain. And you know what that does to trees? You have snow load on trees that can't handle it, that are smaller, and they just bend over. And then as it starts to melt, they pop back up, most of them. And I got a lot of fern trees in the front of my house, and they were all bent over, but they didn't break. You know what I mean? And we had a windstorm with it, and they didn't break. This is something grabbing it with its hand and twisting and breaking it. It's not from a windstorm, because most of the tree limbs I see from a windstorm are broke clean. They're just broke. They can't handle it, and they snap and break, and they fall down. But this isn't like this. So, those are the two experiences I had. Both of them were scary to me. And I went out to Vegas. Here, I sent you guys pictures. Did you guys get them?
Actually, I did not. I'll go back. Did you send them through email?
Yeah, I sent them through email. I went out to Vegas. This is my third time out there. I'm not a big gambler, but my girlfriend is, so she does a lot of gambling. But we try and do something different every time we go out there outside of gambling. First time, she just gambled. I hung out. I'm a musician, so I went and seen some bands, seen some entertainment. Second time, we did the sand rails in the desert, some stuff. So this time, she's like, I'm going to take you to Red Rock Canyon. And I'm like, what's Red Rock Canyon? She said, it's this big mountain range canyon, big, deep canyons. You can hike a little bit. And it's out, I think it's northwest or west of Vegas, about 25, 30 minutes. So we went out there, we paid the money, we went in there, and they got a 13-mile loop. And now, listen, I don't know, have you guys ever been there?
I have not, no.
Has Will?
I haven't, no.
Okay. So it's this mountain range that goes forever, and they're supposed to have wild donkeys out there and wild horses running around. I didn't see any of those, but they have signs up all over, don't feed the horses, all that. So we go, they got stations where they have, it's kind of like, what's the word I want? Kind of like a rest stop. And I think they got a place where you can go to the bathroom and you can take pictures. So we went to the first one, and it was a deep, deep crevice, and people were hiking down in it, and they looked real small. So it was pretty big. And this probably runs, I don't know how many hundreds of miles it runs. I don't know how many thousands of acres it is. So we go to the first one, and then it was a 20-mile-an-hour wind out there. And I dressed for 90-degree temperatures. I brought T-shirts and shorts. It didn't get out of the 60s, and it was in the 40s at night. So it totally blew my mind because, last time I was there was like 105 out there in the desert. So we get back in the car, and we skip a station, and we go to the third station. And we get out, and we take some panoramic pictures of all the mountain range and everything. It's really beautiful, and mountains forever. And we turn around and we go across, and I'm like, oh, hey, you can hike in here. Let's go hike a little bit in here on the trail a little bit. So we park the car, and there's people coming out of the canyon area, and they're like, we're like, how far is this? And they're like, oh, it's not too far. It's just a small hike. So we go back in there, and once again, no Bigfoot on my mind. I'm just out there on vacation, having a good time. And I'm walking through the trails and the mesquite and cactus and all that stuff. And we're walking through, and we go over to the side of this rock, and there's a pyroglyphic on there. And we're like, oh my God, I'm taking pictures of it because I've never seen one for real in real life. And they got a little stand there, and it tells you about they don't know who did it or what Indian tribe or whatever. So we're looking at that, and I start to hear a voice. I start to hear a female voice and another voice. I'm like, what the? There's nobody even around here. We're here by ourselves. And I started to get really like goosebumps and a little eerie about being there. And I was getting ready to tell my girlfriend, come on, let's go. And I look up, and there's a guy climbing. He's like climbing the side of the mountain or the cliff area. He's up in there 3/4 of the way, and he's got a guide line down to it must be his wife or his girlfriend, and she's holding on to it. And he's up there putting clamps in. And then I started taking pictures because I'm like, hey. And then I didn't hear anything. And then I look up and see him. I go, hey. And he goes, what? And I'm like, wow, man. I was just trying to get your attention because I didn't know you were climbing up there. It's kind of cool. We're kind of walking around and everything. And I'm like, you know what? I like to explore. When I go into a woods and I'm scouting the woods to hunt in the summer, whatever, I go through it. I mean, I want to know, where all the deer runs are, what way I think they're coming, where the bedding areas. I scout a lot. So I'm like, you know what? I've been here 3 years, but I probably won't ever get out here again, or it'll probably be a long time. So I start walking north, I think it is. And I start walking through the mesquite and everything. And I'm thinking, it'd be really cool to see a rattlesnake or see a tarantula because I've never really seen one. I've seen snakes before, and I've seen big spiders, but never a tarantula or a desert tarantula. So I'm just walking through this, and I'm zigzagging. And my girlfriend's like, where are you going? And I just took my hand and kind of waved it. Like, shh, I want to see if there's any wildlife. So I walk probably 100 yards from her, maybe 125 yards. I don't know. It was pretty far distance. And all of a sudden I come to this clearing in the mesquite and everything. Like it was kind of open. There was some cactus and stuff, but it was mainly open. And I look over to my right, and there's a 2.5-foot rock stacking. And I look straight ahead of me. There's a 3-foot rock stacking. I look over to the left of me, and there's another 2-foot or 2.5-foot rock stacking. And I immediately went, and here's the other thing. It was real windy. I got down that canyon about 100 yards or so. There was no wind. It was like dead quiet, no wind, no nothing. Just went dead. And I'm like, I got to get my camera out. I started taking pictures of these things because I've never seen them before. I've never seen any kind of rock stacking or anything. Right. And then, I found out that, people gift them and they'll rock stack or, there was a family in Tennessee that had some on their property, and they had several run-ins with them, and they broke into their canning place where they had canning jars and broke all their jars and ate their food. And they had scat in one area. I mean, you can look it up and see the pictures. And then they had a thing with these rocks stacked up on, almost like what I saw out there and pictures I sent you guys. One was real tall. And I'm thinking to myself, oh my God, don't even tell me that Sasquatch did this. Don't tell me that they're in here somewhere. And I can't, the undergrowth and everything is so tall that you have to walk around stuff because you can't see through it because it's so thick. And I'm thinking, is there one in here on his belly? I heard they crawl on their bellies. I heard they crawl like spiders. And I'm thinking, okay, I'm taking pictures. I'm backing out of here and getting out of here. So my girlfriend comes walking up. And I go, look at this. And she goes, what's that? I said, those are rock stackings. And Sasquatch does that a lot. And she's like, come on, man. Because I think now I told my wife in 2003, my soon-to-be ex-wife, about what happened. And I didn't tell anybody else. And I didn't tell anybody anything till after 2015 when I had this second experience. And then I started telling some of my friends. I told Colleen, she's like, I would never go in another woods again. Because we watch all kinds of things, documentaries and everything on TV, because I'm fascinated about it. Not that I want to walk in a woods and see something 10 foot staring at me. I told Tom it would be great to drive down a highway at 70 miles an hour and see one staying alongside the road. I'm good with that, but I don't know if I want one crawling up to me like a spider or, anything creepy like that, or smiling at me, or like other accounts I've heard from people. But I said, we need to back out of here and just go back to where we were and get out of here. So I said, you just try on a walk and I'm going to walk backwards, and you be your eyes for me. I'm going to be my eyes for you. So in case anything happens, I can tell you to run. And she's like, oh, nothing's going to happen. I said, this is really creepy because there's no wind in here. There's nothing. So we got out, we got up the trail, we got up to our car, and then it was windy as you wouldn't believe. 20-mile-an-hour gusts blowing everywhere. And we just got in the car and we got out of there. So when we got back to the hotel.
Yeah, well, that's and just the kind of, it's almost like a monotone or, just sort of it's like an imitation of a whistle. So, well, listen, Scott, this is absolutely, you've had some really interesting encounters and some interesting situations. So I really appreciate you taking the time to be on the show. And I hope we stay in touch. And if you get any updates, by all means, please let us know.
Yeah, very interesting, Scott.
I'm sorry I didn't hear you.
Oh, very interesting. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, I hope you guys can find the pictures of the rock stackings that I sent you guys, because I sent them over on the email, Tom. I think it was directed towards you. So, but I took pretty good pictures of them. But it was really weird and eerie. There was no wind, and then all of a sudden, I find all these rock stackings. And the thing, and this is just my perspective. I know people hoax. I know there's probably been a lot of people that have hoaxed, but and this is just my opinion. If I was going to hoax something, I would do it where somebody's going to see it. I would not hoax it 200 yards off the beaten path where probably nobody's going to ever go. It just doesn't make any sense to me. So me seeing that, I just was like, this is not somebody hoaxing.
Well, that's a good point. I just checked my inbox. Maybe if you get a chance, I'd love to see them. So if you get an opportunity, send them again. You've got my email address, tom@creekdevil.com. Yep. And Will and I'd both like to see those.
Yeah, I have your phone number. I can probably try texting them to you.
No, that phone is a cheap phone. Oh. And it'll never make it through. Yeah, just send it by email. That'll work. The phone, I'm pretty sure, would not.
Okay, so send them to the Creek Devil one?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Tom@creekdevil.com.
Okay, I will definitely get on that and do that. And thanks a lot for letting me come on and tell about what's happened to me. And it's very therapeutic for me. The funny thing, I've never had nightmares. I've never had nightmares about any of this, but it's still scary to go in at 4:00 in the morning in the dark, even with a flashlight, when you have something that sounds like it's 600 to 1,000 pounds running through the woods. And this thing was fast. I mean, it was on 2 feet and fast, like it was moving, but I knew it was taking big, giant strides because of the pause in between each one. I mean, it was moving, and that got my attention really quick.
I bet it did. Absolutely. Well, listen, thanks again, Scott. And I'll keep an eye out for those pictures. I really can't say how much I appreciate that. I really do.
Well, thank you guys for letting me come on, and you guys have a good night where you are, and be careful in the woods because a lot of people go missing. A lot of hunters go missing. You guys be careful out there because I know they're out there where you are.
You too. Well, obviously they're in your neck of the woods. Awesome. Thanks, Scott. Have a good weekend.
Okay. Bye-bye now.
Take care, buddy. You bet. Bye-bye.
Welcome back from the break, everyone. Tom's going to join us in a few minutes. He got a call, so we're going to just kind of jump into questions here. Brian, how you doing today?
Pretty good. How about you?
I'm good. It's been a busy morning so far. So what do we got? What do we want to start with?
Well, actually, to start with, this isn't really a question. I think that either you or Tom may have responded to this person, but this is from our YouTube questions from somebody that watched the video or listened to the audio, and this is from Fast Elk, and he says that he's from the Blackfeet Reservation. His family has many stories about these creatures. They are not just another animal in the forest to the pagan. So basically, somebody responded that actually it was Cabo Rico, and I think somebody, maybe you or Tom, also responded that they would love to hear about some of these stories. So by all means, Fast Elk, if you haven't contacted us already, make sure to go to questions@creekdevil.com or get in touch with us so we can have you on, because we'd love to hear some of your stories. And that goes to not just this person, Fast Elk, but anybody out there that's listening that might have some stories. We'd love to have you on the show.
Absolutely. And I'd like to comment, too, that, one of our friends is Wynn, who lives on the Flathead Reservation, and Wynn told me he has cousins with the Blackfeet, and we're going to be going there here in the near future. So, would love to actually chat with some of the folks there, and by all means, get in touch with us.
Yeah. Also, another question that somebody raised, and I know that you've talked about this before, but I guess they want to, maybe they haven't heard some of our previous episodes, but this is from Mark, and he wants to know, are there reports of Sasquatch swimming or activity in the water?
Actually, there are quite a lot. In fact, if you can even look in John Green's old books, and there's some accounts in there, but when I was researching Clark and Skamania counties, Mount St. Helens region of Washington State back in the 80s and 90s, I had a lot of reports from people along the Columbia River who actually saw the creature swimming back and forth. So, yeah, that's a common part of this, actually.
Yeah, and another point to make here as well is that whenever somebody asks a question in YouTube, you can always go back, because not only can Will answer your question, but also it looks like a couple other people did as well. Both Richard and another user named Forest Meadows have commented on Mark's question, saying that lots of reports of them exploring islands and lakes and hunting in reeds next to rivers and lakes, likely hunting things such as frogs and fish, of course. So actually, kind of a follow-up question that I have to this is that we know from not just you talking through witnesses that you've interviewed, but from other people that we've had on the show, that when there are reports of them, they're not solitary animals, right? So they're usually in groups. So the reports that we have of them swimming, have people commented or noted in their observation that there were more than one of the creatures swimming at a time, or is it usually just one that somebody sites?
Usually it's a singular one, but I have reports, not necessarily swimming. I know one I'm thinking of in particular. The witness saw several creatures at a lake shore. One of them was actually out. I think it was on a dock. So they may have been swimming, but the person didn't say, but they were in close proximity to water. But usually it's an individual, or maybe two they'd see, but usually one, maybe two.
Okay, and also another follow-up to that. When they do swim, are they, for the most part, just swimming to get to a new area? And of course, this can differ depending on what area of the country, because, in Florida, they have the skunk ape, which they say spends quite a bit of time in the water, as well as the Fouke monster and and so forth. But when they usually are in the water, are they trying to usually get to a place, or are they actually hunting, like for fish, maybe alligators, frogs, do you think?
Probably both. I mean, a lot of times it's crossing the body of water, but in some of those locations it's probably, feeding related. And, when we talk about lakes and swamps and things like that, rivers, those are, everything has to have water, so those are a natural draw for prey animals. So, it's something to keep in mind.
Yeah. Okay, to kind of switch topics. Okay, you would know probably a lot more about this than most people, but from what I understand, Renee DeHinden, of course, Renee wrote a book with Don Hunter in the 1970s. It was just called Sasquatch. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay, but my question is that I saw that they revised it and came out with a new edition in 1993. So do you know what was the reason why they revised it? Did they find anything new or discover anything new, or was it just kind of like polishing a previous version? Do you know?
I don't know for sure on that, but it's probably just and I've done it myself. I've revised a couple of my own books, to put either new cover, new information in it. Sometimes it depends on the copyright. Copyright's typically around 35 years, so it may be just to renew the copyright.
That's true. I didn't even think about that. But in general, did Renee, from the time that he wrote the first version in 1970s, and obviously you knew him quite well, and of course I think he passed away in 2001, I believe.
Yeah, actually Renee didn't write the book. He wasn't a writer. It was Don Hunter who wrote the book.
Okay.
It was with Renee's assistance, though.
Oh, okay. But from the time that the original came out to the time when maybe Renee passed away, what major discoveries did he make, or did he have any conclusions that he didn't have when he first started researching Bigfoot?
Yeah, he didn't really make big discoveries. Renee was more of a driver when it comes to, getting attention to the subject. He was the first one and the main one to push this, involvement in it to begin with. His conclusions toward the end of his life were that the creatures did exist. That's the conclusion he came to.
Yeah. Okay, to switch topics a little bit, there is somebody else out there that's from our YouTube comments, and they cited someone. I'm not even going to say the person that he's talking about. I'm not going to say their name because a lot of the recordings, the audio recordings, have either been debunked or they're it's hard to say that they're authentic. But anyways, though, the larger point that this person is making, though, is that there are sounds out there. There are recordings, there's audio recordings of the creatures either vocalizing or yelling, screaming in some way. And so obviously a lot of these can be faked. A lot of them are not authentic and so forth. But I wanted to, this isn't really so much of a question, but this is just kind of a comment because somebody I'll just say the name. It's called Scientific American. They're not quite a scholarly publication, but they're not like Time Magazine. So they're a little bit above in terms of prestige.
Right.
And Time Magazine, but they're not quite an academic journal. But anyways, though, this author that wrote about this said, quote, "Before we establish the existence of Bigfoot language, we would need to establish the existence of Bigfoot." But that comment just kind of stuck out to me. That's very irresponsible for a scientist because the whole point is to investigate, to look for discoveries. So you can't just say, oh, well, we haven't established the existence of Bigfoot yet. We haven't found a body. So we can't really investigate the language. And that goes against, in my opinion, that goes against what the whole point of science is all about. I mean, are they going to remember, because gorillas weren't even discovered early on as well, but people knew that they were out there and they were investigating. So that just kind of seems irresponsible to me as a person that's interested in science, because you should always investigate that.
Well,
it just seems
I do understand his point, though. If it's not proven to be real, you could have sounds from really many sources. How do you know those sounds are legit? Because you don't have one. or haven't established the fact that the creatures are real. In other words, if you're looking at linguistics, that's kind of a difficult thing. I mean, without direct observation, you can't just analyze. I mean, you can analyze sounds, but you kind of need direct observation to go along with that. And I know that people will disagree with that, but that's really how that kind of works. There's, with language, you have to kind of see the context. And I always talk about context. Context is extremely important when you're talking about any part of this.
Yeah. No, I agree. But to kind of use an analogy that's, if you're a police detective and you come upon a scene and you perhaps like blood is cleaned up, they have like luminol now that can detect blood that's been cleaned up and so forth. But a lot of times as a detective, you can surmise that murder or crime took place even if there's no body. So that's just kind of the analogy that I would use, is that, yeah, you can't always, context is important, but you can't just dismiss something just because, well, there's no body,
Mm-hmm. Well, of course, now with police work, that's based on known things, throughout the course of the body of work that police have done. So that's how they can kind of surmise those things, because they were repeating patterns.
Mm-hmm.
But linguistics are a little different, and we'll try to get a linguistics expert on to, go through the details on that, because I may be wrong in some of the stuff, so I'm.
Yeah, I mean, with audio, it seems like the loudness would make a difference, because it seems like that if you're really close to something and you have audio of it, that kind of sounds to me a little suspicious, because it's like, why would you be that close to something? I mean, if it's coming from a distance, though, then that would seem more believable, I would think.
Actually, our friend Thinker Thunker, for those of you who know who he is on YouTube, did a really good piece, and I can't remember, it was on one of the reservations, one of the Native American reservations. There was some audio, and he did a really good analysis on that. And I think if you were to look at what he did on his video, that goes a long way, because there were certain bandwidths, and he did some comparisons with other vocalizations. So you could imply based on that different recordings were legitimate because of these bandwidths that he's working with. But, I'm not giving too many details because I'm not that familiar with it, but take a look at what he did and his explanation. It's pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say that with technology these days, I think that we can get a lot more information about audio and the legitimacy of if it's like real or if it could be. And sometimes it's not just people making up stuff or trying to hoax people. Sometimes it's just misidentification, just the same thing as
right
sighting.
Now, a lot of the vocals, I've heard a number of them that were recorded in the past. Now, the vocals don't imply language. They're screams. That's something entirely different, what they're doing. But I've heard a number of those that are similar. I've heard them in the wild over the many years I've done this, which, kind of makes me think, on a kind of side note, we get one person on YouTube, and it's just one person who occasionally says, well, how can I, meaning me, make all these assertions based on my two encounters? The things that I know are not based on those two encounters. Those two encounters are what got me into this. I spent, in December, it'll be 49 years involved in this, with many, many, many thousands of hours in the field up and down the West Coast. So I've seen and done a lot more than just those two encounters for that person, addressing your comment. And the screams are one of these things. I've heard screams from just a few hundred yards away. Well, actually closer than a couple. Well, see, the closest one was maybe, I'm picturing the location, it was on the Olympic Peninsula, maybe 100 yards across from where we were standing to where the individual was making the vocalization. Extremely loud. To other things that were much farther away. So, and with groups of people. I've always had people with me that have heard these vocalizations. So, anyway, getting back to the vocals, there's a range. So that author kind of addressing that question, typically you wouldn't deduce language from most of the vocalizations recorded because they're just screams.
Yeah, and one thing I just want to comment on something that you just said about only having a couple encounters or sightings. There have been times that you knew that they were in the area, even if there was not a direct sighting, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, because, this is just a personal thing, and I'm sure a lot of our listeners out there can identify with this. But you know how we've talked about that encounters are usually just a couple of seconds, just a few seconds, and then they either disappear or that the witness themselves will just run away real fast because they want to get the heck out of there. But, one of the things that occurred to me, too, is that with my phone, for example, like if I were to have a sighting, I wanted to get a quick photo or a quick video. Okay, first of all, I'd have to get my phone out of my pocket, which sometimes takes a second or two, especially if my keys are in there. Then, I don't know about you, but my phone, I have it locked. So that means you have to use your fingerprint on there. Well, my thumbprint never works. I mean, it rarely ever works. So then you have to type in the 6-digit code. Mm-hmm. And then by the time you do that, and then you hit the camera app and make sure it's working and everything. I mean, that itself can take 5 to maybe 6-7 seconds. So
that's a great point. It does. You have to go through all those different steps to just get to that, and then have the presence of mind to begin with, because you're in a situation that's quite frankly, it takes you to the level of fight or flight in your autonomic nervous system. So you're not really focused on, I'm going to pick my phone out and then go through all those various steps to take a picture.
Say cheese. Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. Okay. Another question from a YouTuber is that they were wondering about the Yowie. Is that the same thing as Bigfoot, just a different name?
Essentially, yes.
Yeah. Okay.
And they have two variations there, like we do here.
Mm-hmm. Do the 4 types that are here, or what sometimes you say 5, that there might be like a 4A and a 4B, but does in terms of, and I guess maybe someone would have to analyze scat to know for sure, but do their diets change based on the type? Do you know, like, is there a way that somebody could identify looking at scat, like how much of their diet is protein, like meat, in other words, animal meat, and how much is plants? Or
well, sure, you could tell that. And now these things are going to eat. I mean, they're not going to have a specific diet. In other words, like some animal species, and we're going to be talking about things like that in the near future. We're gonna put a new, for people listening, we're going to be putting together a new segment for the show. So, in other words, we're going to change. Sorry to get off topic there for a minute, but I'll come back to that. Sure. And you and I haven't talked about this yet, Brian. Something I came up with yesterday. We're going to do a different segment. We'll talk about that later, what we're going to do, but we're going to put a new segment in rotation on the show. So we won't be doing a Q&A every week. We'll be doing other pieces as well. But back to your question, because these things are an omnivore, they will eat anything, essentially, including garbage. So, but with scat, you can tell how much is protein in our forensic anthropologist, John, that we've had on a few times. I've sent him photographs of scat that I've found in the wild. And oftentimes you can tell simply by the color, a lot of times, if it's more protein than vegetable material.
Okay.
And oftentimes it's mostly protein the creatures are eating.
Yeah, that's what I figured. A lot of deer.
Very dark color usually indicates protein. Now, I know with deer and some animals, they have also dark scat, but when you look at it, it's different. The vegetable material is different than protein in the scat.
Mm-hmm. Okay, another question that I have, so this question comes from me, is that we've heard a lot of people all the time say that they have rocks thrown at them. And a lot of times they actually are hit with rocks. Other times they're missing. The Sasquatch are missing. But my question is, are they intentionally trying to hit people most of the time, and with the intent of injuring them and maybe eventually killing them, or are they intentionally just throwing rocks in our area just to kind of say, hey, this is our territory. It's time for you to leave?
I think it's most oftentimes it's just to get your attention. There have been accounts where they've been intentionally trying to get people, but usually that's the situations where they're throwing large rocks. We're talking, baseball-sized rocks. But sometimes, we have a friend of ours that we talked to not long ago had a situation where creatures were throwing very large rocks at him, but they weren't trying to hit him. It was just simply, and he commented about the distance. It was quite a distance they were throwing these rocks, so there was a great deal of strength involved. But I think, if they're trying to hit you, they're gonna get pretty close. They're gonna most likely get you if they're trying to get you. But oftentimes it's smaller objects, rocks, etc., and that's usually an attention getter.
What's interesting, I know that this might sound like an odd question or odd observation. This is just kind of speculation, but for those listeners out there that might be sports fans, maybe this this question has occurred to you as well, or this thought has occurred to you as well. But I kind of wonder sometimes when people describe them throwing rocks and missing, it kind of almost leads me to think sometimes that maybe because these Sasquatches, their hands are so big that maybe it's hard for them to be accurate to begin with. And the sports analogy that I use sometimes is if you look at tall basketball players, big, huge basketball players, like Shaquille O'Neal comes to mind, the former basketball player, but he was always a terrible free throw shooter. In fact, all of his field goals were usually inside 5 feet, a lot of times dunks and so forth, but he was a terrible free throw shooter. And they said that the reason why is probably because his hands were so big that it was hard to be accurate. And I wonder, unless a Sasquatch is throwing a rock the size or a stone the size of a bowling ball, it seems like if they're just throwing normal rocks that you would find, it seems like it might be difficult for them to be accurate anyways, but I don't know.
Well,
thoughts on that?
We had Scott on in the previous segment who had stuff thrown at him, and I believe he was hit. Plus, the episode last week, we had Abe on, and Abe had, the creature threw its scat at him and hit him. So I think if you throw poop back accurately, you got a pretty good aim.
I'm going to jump in
what do you
real
think?
quick. Yeah. We had a guy that actually I've talked to a couple people who've had rocks thrown at us a year and a half, probably about a year and a half ago. I was talking to a guy here in Oregon who he goes out and collects, chanterelles and huckleberries, that sort of thing, and then sells them on the roadside. And him and his dog, he pointed to the area where he's at. He said, I was right up there. And he said, that was 2 months ago. And I had a couple of these things growling, and they were throwing rocks the size of cantaloupe at me. And they were just whizzing. The impression I got, these things are just crashing through the branches and whizzing by him. So he got out of there. I think they're maybe doing a little more than just trying to get his attention. I think maybe they're trying to kill him or seriously injure him.
I think it really depends on the context, because our good friend we spoke with who had a situation similar to that felt that they were just trying to get his attention. So I think it kind of depends on what's going on. Yeah,
that's true. Yeah, and the friend of ours that we spoke with, I think he said it was over 700 feet.
It was quite a distance. Yeah, he was very impressed with it. But it shows the great strength the creatures have. Yeah,
absolutely. Well, you and I have, we talked about this. We looked at the size of the creature's arm. It's like as big around as, our waist. I mean, they're just massive.
Which goes back to what Scott said in the previous segment, about, hearing these trees being torn apart and found them twisted and broken, which I found myself in the field.
Yeah, how do you do that? I mean, that's an incredible amount of.
It's a lot of strength.
At some point, I'd like to get an engineer on who can talk about the breaking strength of various live tree types. Douglas fir and nobles and even oak trees.
Will, I have to kind of switch topics a little bit. I guess it would take a major polling firm to do this and to get it accurate. But the fact that many older people, not just in academia, but just older people in general, a lot of times dismiss the idea of Bigfoot's existence. And it makes me wonder sometimes that if that kind of affects how younger people view the subject and how, it's the whole subject, it kind of gets made fun of sometimes. And it makes me wonder if the fact that a lot of older people, older academics, a lot of times who say, oh, well, there's no body, it doesn't exist, there's no evidence for its existence and so forth. It makes me wonder the way that how younger people perceive the creature. And it would be interesting to if somebody were to do a poll, to pull people randomly, like a random sample, and get people from different demographics, like older people, younger people, male, female. It makes me wonder what the results would be. Like if they were to just ask, do you believe in the creature, yes or no? And it makes me wonder if young people, maybe they would actually say that they're open to it, because maybe as young people, they're more inquisitive, they're more likely to believe in it. But I don't know. Any thoughts on that? Like what the poll results would be, do you think?
Well, before we get into that, I mean, Tom has a little information because we did do a poll, but hold on for a moment on that thought. I can tell you as far as listeners go, at least on YouTube, we're about, it's lopsided. It's about 70, a little over 70% male listeners versus about 30% female. So there's a difference there, but that could be just interest. Previously in years past, I'm sure that did have an effect. It's a lessening effect now because more people are more open to the possibility of the creatures being real. So those numbers are changing. But Tom, we weren't able to so far get the person who was going to do the stats. Do you want to talk a little bit about what the poll results we do have are?
Yeah, actually, I think what I'm going to do is, this is the gentleman that you and I had talked about earlier. This is the guy that I've gone, we went out, and when I first found that first set of footprints in a very remote area, we got back to the truck, and he goes, I don't mean to be hard, but don't ask. I'm never coming back here. He also, got his, it's not an MBA, but he got a master's. He got a graduate degree in some kind of a business course. And one of his favorite topics in that course was statistics. So it takes a different kind of person who really enjoys stats. But he and I have worked them out, and we've got a few more poll results since then. And I'm going to compile this information together, and I may even meet with him this weekend sometime, and we're going to really sit down and we're going to come up with the results, and we'll put those on the air. I do want to caution that the results it's not 100% scientific. It's just kind of subjective to how people answer the questions, but I think it'll be a good indicator.
Yeah, that would be some very interesting data to collect and analyze. Yeah, for sure.
And Brian, I like your idea of, doing like a Gallup type poll with people who just believe, what are their thoughts, and so you could break it down by, you could get a kind of a demographic breakdown of age and all that sort of stuff. That'd be a very fascinating study.
Yeah, and I'm sure you could also break it down for hunters versus non-hunters, and I'm sure that more hunters or outdoorsmen just in general would probably be more likely to believe in the creature's existence.
That is, Brian, that's actually a good point, because I'm just thinking in terms of the people that the circle of friends and acquaintances that I have. It seems like the hunters they tend to be more open to this. But the casual hikers
captivated more
not so much
around the world than Bigfoot.
And the response I get is, "Well, I've never seen one."
With a Patterson
well, the areas that you're hiking, especially here in Oregon, one of the popular areas is section hiking on the Pacific Crest Trail, the PCT. I say, yeah, maybe you haven't seen one, but I'm pretty sure they've seen you.
Yeah, and I mean, I imagine that they're probably not hiking in the same places that hunters go because obviously you don't want people hiking in the vicinity of people shooting guns, right? So it seems that they wouldn't be in that spot to find a creature anyways.
Yeah, it's a good point.
I can give you a little bit of information, at least from the YouTube channel, and this is interesting in terms of who listens to the show. We're looking at age and gender. Okay, these are just a couple of stats, and this is just from the YouTube channel. So the stats have changed a little bit. Male audience is 81.8%. Female is 18.2%. Age. Now, age is 25 to 34-year-olds, 4.3%. 35 to 44-year-olds, 15.1%. 45 to 54-year-olds, 35.7%. 55 to 64-year-olds are 31.9%, and 65 plus are 13.1%. So our audience is typically an older crowd.
Are you calling me old?
We're all old.
Yeah.
Sorry, but that's an interesting statistics there.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. Well, and I got to say, I'm a little bit of a stat nerd myself, so yeah, I love that stuff because it reveals, if you gather enough information and do a kind of a trend analysis, it things begin to show up. So yeah, it's very good.
And also a lot of that is just common sense anyways, that because the older that you are, the more time that you probably spent in the woods, the more likely, just from a sheer time perspective, the more likely that you are to have seen these creatures or at least heard stories about them. So, well,
and I think too, in different age groups, there are different interests and activities that people are doing. So, younger people aren't typically sitting around listening to podcasts. They have other activities they're involved with.
That's interesting too, because I was just thinking about the younger population, because with pop culture, there is some interest in it. I mean, for example, on Netflix, there was a show. I didn't really see it, but I know that there was a show. It may have been a cartoon, I think, that was called like the Bigfoot Family or something like that.
Yeah, we know younger people are definitely interested in the subject. I mean, an example is Fred Sieber last year, and then just recently we did a question and answer session with his fifth grade class in Okinawa. So definitely some interest there, and the results are, I think, Tom, you'd agree, they're kind of mixed like the general population. There were some who didn't believe, some who were on the fence, some who did believe in the subject, and they all had very good questions.
Yeah, and well, speaking of younger people, I've often wondered, because Hollywood seems to be out of ideas, as we all know. They seem to be remaking everything, and I wonder if the idea has been floated around Hollywood, either as a TV show or as a movie, to have like a reboot or a remake of Harry and the Hendersons, because when you think about it, that movie, I don't think it did too well back in the 1980s, but it was produced by Steven Spielberg. It is kind of an E.T. ripoff, they said.
Yeah, it's kind of a silly movie, actually.
Well, the one of the researcher in that is based on Renee.
Well, it's him and Green both. The two main characters. I can't remember what the first guy was, but that was John Green's character, the more serious one, and the Frenchman was René Dain. In fact, I was at John Green's house about the time that movie came out, and we were all having a pretty good chuckle, because everyone knew that was René.
Yeah. Speaking of that movie, just out of curiosity, has anybody ever, and maybe, we should have Bill Munns again, one of these shows, but but has anybody ever described the creature, like any real eyewitnesses, as described the creature as looking like Harry from Harry and the Hendersons?
Oh, no, the face is completely wrong.
So it looks more like Patty's face, in other words, right?
Well, not the suit they made for the movie.
No, I mean, but the witnesses, they describe it
Oh
as
yeah,
looking.
yeah. Well, what you see in the film is real. Regardless of what people listening may think, I've seen the creatures, face to face. That's what it looks like.
And of course, it could also vary by the types.
That's true. There's some variation.
Yeah. But speaking of variation, going back to the vocalizations for a second, do each of the types vocalize the same way, or do we even know that at this point? I mean,
It's not something we know, but when you hear recordings that are the ones I feel are legitimate, and that's based on things I've heard in the wild, they're similar, the noises they make. I don't know that you could distinguish one type from the other based on vocals.
Yeah. Well, speaking about the types, have you, because your experiences are mostly with the type 1s, right? But have you ever had encounters, or, well, close encounters, or near encounters, I should say, with others that you think were not the type 1s?
I don't know, because I never actually saw them. I mean, we've heard things. We saw eyeshine, but I never actually saw the creature in terms of a good description at Yakult. So, but I suspect they were type 1s, because that's just the part of the country that is predominantly that particular kind. It's possible, with vocals, there could have been others in the area that weren't the type 1s, but I have no way of knowing.
I'm going to jump in. I got a question from one of our listeners, and this is from Robert in Kentucky, and he has a really interesting question. I like this one. It says, Will, do you ever receive reports from pilots operating small aircraft? Now, I'm assuming he's not asking us if we ever talk to people who are flying little Cessnas, but I think I'm going to try to interpret. I think what the question really is have we ever heard of anybody flying like small aircraft? Because I have, that have looked down and seen one of the creatures, like on a mountainside or something. Have you ever heard that?
Well, if you go back to John Green's books, I like going back to his stuff because he presents a lot of information that was out there. And there was a case, I don't remember the year, it was in the 60s, I believe, of a doctor flying a small plane over the Bluff Creek area, of all places. And I believe there was snow on the ground, and he saw the line of tracks, and eventually he came on the creature making the tracks. So he actually saw the creature on the ground and leaving the footprints.
See, that's interesting. And I would love to go out and do some surveillance, I suppose, in areas where you think they might be. I think as long as it's not heavy cover.
I think it's yeah, that's the problem with flying over an area, just because you can't see the ground a lot. I mean, I know from my time with the Air Cav, you can see a lot from the air. However, it depends on the cover. And and it's just not. It's kind of a shotgun approach. It's not a good way. Not a good way to spend your time. You need to kind of know where the creatures are. Otherwise, you could spend tons and tons of time and lots of money and get no results.
I remember one time, had nothing to do with the creature, but I remember I was taking a flying lesson on an old Cessna 150, and I was like, hey, I love the Cascades. I'm going to do that. So I started to head into the Cascades. We're like 2,500 feet, and now we're 1,500 feet. Now we're 750 feet. And I'm looking at trees, and I'm pulling up, and I'm trying to get altitude, and I can't get it. So anyway, it was just kind of a little interesting thing. I finally handed it off to the instructor, said, like, get me out of here.
Do we have any more questions, Tom or Brian? Tom? We're just kind of, I know Brian and I started before you joined us, but we were kind of going over some of the things that were said on questions, things on YouTube, and.
Well, also, this is not really a question, but Tom, at the beginning, we were talking about the difficulty of getting your phone out in time. If you were to see one of these things, getting your phone out in time.
Brian had a good point here.
Yeah, and we have a listener, too, that says the same thing. This is from, his name's Kevin. This is from YouTube. I won't say his last name, but this is from Kevin. And he says that he was, a few years ago, I was standing on the bridge by my house. I live in the suburbs. texting on my cell phone, so it was up in my hand, but began to hear this odd noise coming from the pavement and had deer running towards him. And this was around midnight. It scared him good. And not only, I mean, even though he had his phone in his hand, he says he didn't even think about having a camera in his hand for a millisecond. He was just so stunned. And he doesn't say if that led to a Bigfoot sighting, but he said the deer was coming straight toward him. And the last thing he was thinking about was taking a picture.
That's a real good question, or a good point, Brian, because I watched a YouTube video. It had absolutely nothing to do with wildlife. It had to do with some guys. This is actually in Sacramento. They caught red-handed some criminals who were stealing, something out of cars. And his comment was, it didn't even occur to me. I was just in this kind of, you're in the moment. You're in the fight or flee moment. And digging the phone out was the last thing on his mind. So
Brian,
in those two situations,
Brian brought up some great
then what
points.
about
Brian, let me go back first. Now, you think about the mechanics of it before, not just having the presence of mind to doing it, but here's what Brian said. Usually, a lot of us carry our phone in our pocket. So you got to pull the phone out of your pocket, and then depending if you have keys or anything in there, so it takes a moment to get your phone out. Then you got to type in the passcode to unlock the screen. Most of us have our screens locked. Then you got to bring up the camera. So you're doing all those steps while having the presence of mind of something that's, got you in a state of shock.
And how long does it, because think about, this is for all of us now and the audience as well. When you do take a picture with your camera and you go through all those steps, and then you hold it up and it takes a moment for it to focus. And then, like I've got an iPhone, so you decide, well, let's see, did I want high def or just regular? There's all these decisions you have to make. It's just not going to happen with, it's not a real sound argument to say, well, there's a lot of people out there with iPhones and mobile phones. Why don't we have more pictures on those?
Right. It's not that it can't happen, but it's really, when you think about it, it's not likely. Because you have to have both presence of mind and go through all the mechanics of doing it.
Right. And that's a good point about the deer, because, Will, you've talked about you and I think it was Jack were up in the mountains. You had the camera and the bear was right there.
We had both discussed this throughout the day of being prepared and ready for this exact reason. That you have to have the presence of mind, and then you have to have it in your hand ready to go, ready just to push the record button, right? We both had camcorders in hands, little small ones that you used to be able to get. And we were up in one of the research areas, and it was late at night. I mean, we were tired, granted, but we were still pretty amped up, and we were heading back towards our camp. And I saw movement out of his side. He was driving, and there was the peripheral lights, right from the headlights. I could see something running on a road that was adjacent to the one we were on, and the road intersected with us. And this little year-old black bear comes zipping out in front of his Yukon. And we're kind of oohing and awing as he's trying to keep up with the little bugger. And then about 100 feet down the road or so, it zipped off into the timber. And we stopped and we looked at each other like, well, some researchers we didn't even get a film of the damn bear. Because you're in the moment. Even though we had the cameras in our hands, both of us had one. And the animal's right there. And we had discussed this that very day in some length about only having one chance. Something comes out in front of you and you have to be ready to get film of it. Well, we weren't prepared at all.
Yeah, so think about it. If you hadn't, for the people that haven't even gone through that process of saying, hey, listen, we're going to be prepared. We're going to take a picture. I was driving up a ridge last summer, and bear just kind of gloped across the road, and I not even a chance taking a picture of it.
Same here. In that same area, we see bear every time we go in there. You'd think we'd be prepared for taking pictures. I yet have a picture of a single bear in that area. I've cast tracks. We see them all the time, every single time we go there. Not a picture.
Yeah, and you guys, here's another comment from somebody on YouTube. This is from Dan, and he did have a sighting, and he says in the comments, I tried to get the camera on my phone open and hit record. I couldn't get it turned on. my hand was shaking too badly, and it noticed me. He dropped it. It said I had to drop my phone in the floorboard of the car I was driving on and pull out my pistol while mashing accelerator to the floor. I came up trying to get what would have been the best video ever gotten. So even in situations like that, it's obviously, you see the thing, it sees you, and you're not really thinking about, let me take a picture real quick. Right. Can you hold still?
And as a side note, I've noticed a number of people who've commented about their encounters. Please get a hold of us. You can either get a hold of us at the Creek Devil website or my own personal email, williamjevning@yahoo.com. It was questions at creekdevil.com we can do, right, Tom?
Yeah, questions at creekdevil.com. Absolutely.
Get a hold of us. We'd love to hear your stories.
And on that note, too, case in point, we have a listener named Mark, and he says that since he was 5, he had a lot of sightings so far. So, Mark, if you haven't contacted us already, make sure to do so, because we'd love to hear about it. He said one of his encounters was violent, so we would definitely love to hear about that. And then also, Donna replied to that saying that she's had some sightings as well. So,
yeah, folks, definitely. all of you that have had encounters, we'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, a very good point. We've had the last show, I think it was episode 119, maybe a couple of them before that, where people have commented that they had an encounter. So we love to hear those comments. But if you want to share them, and you don't have to be on the show, we'd love to have you on. But if you want to just kind of share that with us, again, just shoot us an email, questions@creekdevil.com. And especially if you want to be on the show, that's a great way to get a hold of us.
Yeah, we do enjoy talking to people, and if you're interested in doing the show, that's great. But if not, we still like to talk to you.
Yeah, okay. And we have another question that came. This is probably from a few weeks ago, but this is somebody who wants to know, because I guess we mentioned it before. I know that we mentioned it before in previous episodes, but we mentioned it, and I guess he wants to have you comment on this again, Will, about the Teddy Roosevelt, the Bowman story. Can you just briefly kind of go over that real quick?
Yeah, the Bowman story. I first saw it in John Green's book, one of his early books. I can't remember which one, but I went back and bought a copy of Roosevelt's book. It was, I believe, published 1892. Wilderness Hunter and sorry, I got distracted from my text here for a minute, folks. Yeah, it wasn't his encounter or anything. Roosevelt was out west. He made a lot of trips out west, and it was kind of just an interest to his. If you read his biography, he talks about why he made trips out to the west. I think he was if I recall, a bit of a sickly child growing up, and he wanted to kind of toughen himself up, so he went out west. And in the process, he met a lot of people, and he started recording stories they would tell him. And now whether Roosevelt believed the stories or not is up to interpretation, but he recorded and then put the stories in his books. One of those stories was about 2 trappers who went into an area near the border of Idaho and Montana, northern Idaho. And they hadn't done very well trapping. They'd heard rumors about this particular location, and it had a bad reputation because a hunter had been killed there the year before and his remains partially eaten when he was found. No idea what did it. There was no indication. And so they decided to because they had done some poorly trapping, they decided to actually go to the location. And when they went there, they encountered this creature. And just to kind of paraphrase, they decided to leave, felt the creature was following them. Now, they'd actually shot at it one night. It was looming over their lean-to as they were sleeping. Shot at it or hit it. They felt they hit it and had noticed it was walking on 2 feet. They thought it was a bear, but didn't pay much attention, so they decided to leave. They got separated because there were some traps in a particular pond. Bauman went there. It was the only traps that actually had beaver in them, so it took him some time to retrieve the traps and the beaver. By the time he got back to the camp, the other one was going to get their packs ready to go. And when Bauman returned there, he found his partner had been killed. So there were 4 great fang marks in the back of the trapper's neck, and his body apparently had been rolled over a number of times, and it scared the hell out of him. He just took his rifle and took off running, down to where the horses were, and he took off and just left.
Well, what just caught my attention, I forgot about that one little detail, the fang marks. So in your mind, this probably sounds like type 2, maybe a type 3, but not a type 1.
Yeah, exactly, because the type 1s don't have fangs. They have the flat, blocky teeth that are similar to humans. The type 2s have the fangs, or the canine teeth. And they seem to be a little bit more aggressive.
Yeah, I forget what I know you said it at the beginning, but what state was this in?
It was on the border of Idaho and Montana.
Okay. Are there a lot of reports of the type 2s or type 3s in that area?
Not particularly. It's still a type 1 region, but it doesn't mean they're not there.
Yeah. It makes me wonder too, in addition to Roosevelt, I wonder if there are other historical figures out there that have either maybe not had encounters, but maybe have heard of stories that we just don't know about because they didn't make public or they didn't make known because maybe at that time there was a stigma against.
I don't think a stigma necessarily. It's just, things that people weren't looking for. But I believe I've seen people comment that Daniel Boone was supposed to have had an encounter with one.
Oh, really? I never heard that.
I've seen people comment, and I haven't actually seen the original text myself, but that's what I've read.
Well, Norma, was it last week?
Yeah, she had some
Bob,
good stuff.
Yeah, Rogers Rangers had that in their journals, and that's we're talking Revolutionary War.
Well, it was actually Revolutionary War time. That's when they were created, and Rogers Rangers were the forerunners of today's Army Rangers.
Yeah. Okay. And so these guys are, they're deep in the woods. They're very familiar with, they're definitely backwoods experienced. And, I mentioned on the show, it'd be interesting to do some online research with that, with the Library of Congress, and I'd love to see those journals.
We had a retired colonel on some time back, Alan. He's a historian. He would probably know. He's also a ranger, so I'll have to get in touch with him and see what he knows about that. Well, do we have more questions, fellas? We still have a few minutes.
Well, it's not a listener question, but just kind of a comment talking about, the creatures have a home range, but they also have, or I guess this would be a question, do you think they probably also have a core area, just like most primates, chimps and gorillas?
Yeah, it's going to be the same kind of configuration. Oh, one thing, not off topic, just a little bit, we were discussing before, you had to step away for a moment, about younger people, having an interest in the topic. And I mentioned, when we did recently Fred Sieber's video call with his 5th grade class in Okinawa, and I wanted to get your input on that. Because I said there was kind of a real mixture that was sort of comparable to, I guess, the general public among his students as far as non-believers, believers, people on the fence. What was your take on that?
Yeah, that's a real good point. I hadn't thought of that until you mentioned it just now, but that's exactly what that was. There was a mixture of those who did believe and those who didn't. And I think there's even a couple of those kids were, maybe more than a couple, who were kind of on the fence and would want more information. And that really is kind of a good breakdown of here, our society, of how people see it. There's a lot of people that don't believe, and then there's some who do for whatever reason, and then there's those who are on the fence that are open-minded, but they'd like more information or more evidence.
And if you listeners out there like to see that video, Fred posted it on Facebook on the JRG Research group page. That's the Jevning Research group. You can go there and find it. It's interesting. I mean, those kids really had some great questions. Very sophisticated.
Yeah, they really did. Was that like a 5th grade class? I don't know what grade it was.
Yeah, Fred teaches 5th grade.
Okay, yeah. So a lot of really good questions from those kids. I hope they're listening or they get a chance to hear this, because we really appreciated that. And
I was very impressed.
Yes, I was too, very much so.
Well, Brian, what do you think? You have questions or comments, or?
Just real quickly, going back to the Rogers Rangers, it occurred to me too that there were probably a lot more sightings during that time. But you have to remember too, because he kept those records in his journal or in his diary. But you have to think about the population at that time. A lot of people weren't literate. A lot of them couldn't read and write. So there are probably a lot of stories that we just never heard about because they weren't documented.
That's a great point. A lot of people didn't read or write back then. So, but there were people who kept journals. I mean, even Green posted in his books some of the journals and things from way back then, or letters, things like that were written. But many people didn't. And also, nobody knew what the things were. So there wasn't a common name. Usually names were whatever somebody locally decided they were going to call it. Thus we have lots of different names. So you kind of have to know what you're looking for in those old records. And even, I know I've seen these things posted online where there was a claim that in Lewis and Clark's journals there was mention. I read a book about Lewis and Clark, and it chronicled their whole trip. I don't recall seeing anything in that book about it, but you'd have to go back to the original journals and see what they said in there.
Yeah, that would be, and this is maybe a kind of a shout out to the Nez Perce, because they really were instrumental in keeping, the Lewis and Clark expedition going and keeping them alive, actually, at one point. Maybe at some point we could reach out to the Nez Perce and see what if they have any thoughts on this topic.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Love to talk to the folks there. Some of the historical stuff is very interesting in this, especially from time periods where, there wasn't a stigma, there wasn't any of the current pressures on the topic. It was just, this is what we saw, this is what we reported, this is what was said, which, is much more legitimate, I think, than what happens
Well, and that's
today.
kind of a modern phenomenon.
It is.
The silly tabloid treatment of the topic, I think you've said that really started in the late 70s, maybe the early 80s.
It was actually a little earlier. By the 70s, I think. Because the 60s, it was in the papers and magazines, but wasn't as widespread as later. And I think as, the media took more of an interest, it became more of a tongue-in-cheek thing to the media. And that's how the spin began to be put on it. So that's sort of how it all got adopted.
Yeah, I just want to jump back again real quick to the difference between the core area and the home range. So if you're dealing with a regular primate, gorillas or chimps, and you're in their home range, it's kind of a toss of the coin as to whether you're in danger or not. But if you get into their core area, don't they tend to become much more territorial and aggressive at that point?
They would be more so to their own species. Typically, like with other primates, their ranges can overlap, but you get into the core area, that's more territorial.
Yeah, and where I was going with this is, if just hypothetically, if we were to be hiking in the deep woods and stumble on the core area of these creatures. I just wonder what the response could be.
Yeah, I don't know if they would view humans the same way they would as their own kind. That's up in the air. Listen, fellows, we're running out of time. Any final thoughts or questions?
No, I just want to thank everybody for listening. And if you like the show, it really helps us out if you subscribe and click the like button.
Brian?
Yeah, everybody, thanks for listening. And as Tom said, make sure to, if you like the show, hit the like button and continue to listen each week.
And Tom, I mentioned, I think while you stepped away, that I didn't give specifics, but I said that we do have an idea for a new segment we're going to be producing here in the near future. We're not going to do Q&As every week. We're going to mix it up. So we have an interesting idea I think everybody will enjoy. So just kind of a heads up, we're going to do something different. So watch for that and stay tuned for the next segment.
The Clanton Booger of Chilton County, Alabama. The booger, booger boo, and booger man are terms usually heard in the southern states and are local nicknames for the traditionally described Bigfoot or Sasquatch. The Clanton Booger is an old Chilton County, Alabama fable that circulated in the 1960s and was recently stated inaccurately by a self-made cryptozoologist who penned then published this claim. There's a southern version of Bigfoot that is much like a chimpanzee, said Bigfoot researcher and former professor at the University of Southern Maine, Loren Coleman. It runs around in the bottomlands and is much more connected to the creeks and swampy areas. Of course, there is no evidence to support such a wild statement. The North American Bigfoot is a biped. It walks upright as a normal course of locomotion, whereas chimpanzees are quadrupeds, knuckle walkers. There is no fossil record or other evidence for indigenous chimpanzees or bonobos or any of the other great apes in North America. None. There may be those apes held in captivity that may have escaped their enclosures from zoos, circuses, sideshows, or primate sanctuaries, but those are not cryptids. There is no mystery there, certainly nothing that can be classified as a cryptid. At this writing, there is no known link associated between chimpanzees and Sasquatches. Coleman is quoted as saying, "The prints left behind at the Clanton scene proved the creature was more ape than man." But Coleman is not a track expert, and he is not a field-savvy Bigfoot investigator. He is a writer with a penchant for exaggerating truths, such as the nape. That word doesn't exist in the dictionary. It is the invention of the man who tagged himself the world's leading cryptozoologist. According to forensic primate print expert Jay Chilcutt in Conroe, Texas, the dermal ridges and other specific barefoot definitions consistent with Sasquatch tracks are neither man nor ape. See www.bigfootencounters.com/articles/field.htm and other statements by Chilcutt available through a Bigfoot Encounters website search. Whatever Chilton County, Alabama informants were seeing way back in 1960, 49 years ago at this writing, it was not, in my research, Sasquatch related if the tracks were ape-like, with a distant divergent toe. Perhaps a feral or loosed domesticated chimp. Perhaps an overloaded imagination or several rounds of Jack Daniels. At this point, it is important to note that the true southern booger has a big toe and 4 digits that are in alignment. The track imprint of the booger is more human-looking, which is typical of the North American Sasquatch. There is no divergent big toe to the booger track imprint. In another piece of writing, Coleman also refers to the Clanton Booger as giant monkey men of Chilton County. This is simple misinformation. There is no fossil record, simply no evidence such things as giant monkey men ever existed in the U.S. This is another example of Coleman's stretching of the truth. just another of his erroneous proclamations because chimpanzees are not giants and they are not monkey men. The citation and quotations are from the Clanton, Alabama Advertiser, July 7th and 11th, 2004, and according to that particular newspaper article, recounted again in Coleman's Ape Book, where there are other confused comparisons between apes and the Sasquatch. There may very well be Sasquatch-like creatures in Alabama. Certainly there are a number of witness accounts that would support that notion. But there are no giant monkey men with footprints unknown to primate print expert James Chilcutt. At least not yet. A Whistling Sasquatch by Jesse Glass, January 9, 1999. While searching through the newspaper morgues of the Carroll County Historical Society in Westminster, Maryland, I found this article in the August 19, 1839 issue of the Carrolltonian, a now defunct publication. The original article was credited to the Montrose, Pennsylvania Spectator, where it was published under the title Food for the Marvelous. Something like a year ago, there was considerable talk about a strange animal said to have been seen in the southwestern part of Bridgewater. Although the individual who described the animal persisted in declaring that he had seen it and was at first considerably frightened at it, the story was heard and looked upon more as food for the marvelous than as having any foundation in fact. He represented the animal, as we have it through a third person, as having the appearance of a child 7 or 8 years old, although somewhat slimmer and covered entirely with hair. While picking berries, he saw it walking toward him erect and whistling like a person. After recovering from his fright, he is said to have pursued it, but it ran off with such speed, whistling as it went, that he could not catch it. The same, or a similar-looking animal, was seen in Silver Lake Township about 2 weeks since, by a boy some 16 years old. We had the story from the father of the boy, and afterward from the boy himself. The boy was sent to work in the New York state line. He took with him a gun and was told by his father to shoot at anything he might see except persons or cattle. After working a while, he heard some person, his little brother he supposed, coming toward him, whistling quite merrily. He said it looked like a human being, covered with black hair, about the size of his brother, who was 6 or 7 years old. His gun was somewhere a little distance off, and he was very much frightened. However, he got his gun and shot at the animal, but trembled so that he could not hold it still. The strange animal, just as his gun went off, stepped behind a tree and then went off, whistling as before. The father said the boy came home very much frightened. Making due allowance for frights and consequent exaggeration, an animal of singular appearance has doubtless been seen. What it is, or whence it came, is of course yet a mystery. From the description, if an outlang were known to be in the country, we might think this to be it. As no such animal is known, we shall leave the reader to conjecture for himself what it is without vouching for the correctness of the story. The Sasquatch has been known to roar, yell, buzz, and scream, and now it seems he may also whistle.
Welcome. These 8 stories are a collection being brought to you by William Jevning and are being narrated by me, Jim Sower. Story 1. Sasquatch Story. Sonoma County, California. Sonoma County, California. Just a story. Terrifying screams heard. No sighting. July 1980. Well, I have collected enough information from various Bigfoot sites about screams to conclude that I heard a Sasquatch on a bicycle touring trip from Portland, Oregon to Santa Barbara, California in the summer of 1980. My girlfriend and I arrived at Fort Ross Historical Park north of Jenner, California, in Sonoma County on an evening in mid-July. We decided to camp there at Fort Ross, as it was marked as a campsite on our map, but it had no campsites. There was no one at the main house nor around the fort, Old Russian Fur Trading Fort, or on any part of the grounds. We rode to a campground further south, but it was too expensive. We decided to ride back to Fort Ross. We camped to the left of the upper parking lot under some Monterey pines next to a picnic bench. We ate dinner and went to bed at around 9 p.m. At approximately 1 a.m., a scream 20 feet to the left of the tent, our heads were facing the ocean, a blood-curdling scream of various sounds in succession that lasted at least 9 seconds. It frightened me to my bone marrow. I froze in fear, knowing that whatever made the sound was huge. It was so close, I could hear the tremor in its throat. Since I'm a musician, I realize how much force it takes to make a sound that loud. I've also been camping all my life, and have heard various animals, but this was different. I have been told it was a bear or a mountain lion, but I don't think so. Anyway, my girlfriend said in a whisper, "What the frick was that?" I started to reach for a flashlight, and her hand grabbed my wrist with a vice-like pressure so I didn't move. We remained frozen, listening to every little noise for an hour. Incidentally, there were sheep running free everywhere going "bah, bah," and they didn't stop making noise when the scream occurred. Finally, my girlfriend fell asleep, and I remained on guard with my hands hovering around the tent pole to use as a weapon, thinking that at any moment it would stick its fanged head into our tent. At around 2:30 a.m., I guess, I heard another scream down by the fort in the lower parking area. I figured it wasn't coming back, so I fell asleep. It didn't occur to me the next morning that it was a Sasquatch, so I didn't look for footprints, nor did I hear it walking the night before. This is the end of Story 1. Story number 2. A story from Tehama County, California. Summer 1977, 12 o'clock a.m. No sighting, just an odd occurrence. Nearest town, Chester, Highway 36 at Lost Creek Road. Willow Springs Campground in the Mount Lassen National Forest. Directions, take Highway 36 out of Red Bluff, then Wilson Lake Road to first right. The road number is 29 North 18. It leads right into Willow Springs Campground, Lassen National Forest at 530-595-4444. My grandpa, my uncle, and I have been working in the area picking up sugar pine and digger pine cones for about 3 days or so, and had planned on being there for around a week. We were camped in a lower campsite in this campground, just off the main cinder road coming by the camping area. I remember the camp was right next to a creek, and each night we would hear the deer coming down to the creek to water, and would occasionally shine our flashlights and see them drinking. One particular night, we were sitting around relaxing, and I commented that it was strange that we didn't hear any deer in the creek. In fact, I don't recall even hearing any crickets or any of the usual nighttime noises. There was a group of people camped above us about 100 yards or so up the hill, and they hadn't been there camping as long as we had. The three of us could hear the people in the camp talking and such. Then it was quiet. Suddenly, someone in the upper camp shouted, "Hey!" Then some loud talking, and then this growl, scream noise. It was very loud and sounded as if it came from a fairly large animal. My uncle and I looked at each other, asking each other what the heck that noise was. And we looked at my grandpa, who was smiling and chuckling, which I found to be very odd unless it was to cover up being frightened himself. My grandpa was a retired logger from Oregon. My uncle had also spent considerable time in the woods, working as well as hunting most of his life. I had spent a lot of time in the woods, also hunting and working for my uncle, but had never heard a sound like that. Nor had the rest of us. My grandpa said he thought it was probably a bobcat or cougar, but my uncle and I had never heard any animal make that kind of sound, not to mention the fact that those animals will most likely stay away from a loud camp, and may venture closer when it is dark and quiet. Anyway, while we were wondering what the first noise was, there began a lot of hollering and another loud growl scream from the upper camp. Vehicle doors slamming, and then the vehicle took off down the road, tires throwing cinders. They were out of there but fast. We, my uncle and I, were shaken up, but too proud to admit it to my grandpa. We didn't hear anything else from the upper camp, Nothing. I don't know if they left anything up there, or how they were camped or anything. I do know that they didn't come back. We went to bed as it was getting late, and I was so afraid to make any sound, fearful that it would hear me breathing and come into camp to investigate. We left a couple of days later, but I don't recall hearing a deer in the creek in the evenings after that night. All of the information given here is to the best of my recollection. As for the terrain, it was heavily wooded pine forest, quite a bit of brush around the creek area. That's the end of story number 2. Story number 3. Weaverville, Trinity County, California. A young grocery clerk in Weaverville, Trinity County, took me to a point at which he came upon a light-colored Sasquatch during the winter of 1994. It was not far from Big Bar Ranger Station, where he and his girlfriend used to park and neck after work. Engaged in some heavy petting, they were interrupted by the rocking motion of his Chevy Camaro. They looked around, thinking it was one of their friends or other kids screwing around with them, but the windows were pretty fogged up. There was little visibility. Determined to confront the intruder, the young fellow bounced out of the Camaro, screaming, "Knock it off!" in a most assertive tone, only to find himself face to face in the pitch dark with a hulking figure he described as a bit taller than he was. Stunned, the kid backed up into the open car door, unable to move. He said the Bigfoot, with his left fist, wailed on the roof of his Camaro, beating it at least 3 times, but barely denting it. "I heard it breathing. Man, I'm telling you, it was alive. Scary blankety blank. I heard it breathe." The informant called to his girlfriend inside the car, in what she later described as 3 octaves higher than his usual voice, telling her to lay on the horn. Upon hearing the sound of the horn, the Sasquatch sidestepped, backing away from the car, and stared at the kid. I couldn't see his eyes or facial features, but it was clear he was facing me and looking at me. Even as dark as it was, he was only lit up by the car door light. The terrified kid said he got in the car, locked the doors, started the engine, and did a quick U-turn on Big Bar Dump Road. Amazingly, he said the Sasquatch followed them up the road where it turns onto Corral Bottom Road, keeping pace with the car for several hundred feet before trailing off where they could no longer see it. I spoke with the 2 informants at J.C. Cafe in Junction City for more than 2 hours. Their account never wavered, and they still showed great fear in recalling the event. The female witness never actually saw the creature, but said she heard its raspy breathing. It was evidently too dark to get much of a description other than what he could see of the creature, illuminated by the Camaro door's light. He knew right away what he was looking at, but in the shock of the moment, he was able to distinguish little. Responding to my question, "Did you see a reflection from its eyes in the car light?" he replied there was no color or light emitted from its eyes. There was no smell from the creature, and he could not tell if it was male or female, only that it was this humongous, dark, towering image that he could hear breathing quite heavily and with angry intensity. He said it kept pace with his Camaro to about 20 miles an hour. Then it trailed off, but he wasn't sure of his speed. His girlfriend, amazed by it all, only saw a blurred image through the foggy windows. A happy ending to this story, though. The amorous couple are now married and expecting twins. This is the ending of story number 3. Story number 4. Late at Night, Canada. In June 1996, Chief Editor of Animal Watch, Alex Michael, wrote of her encounter with Sasquatch in Volume Number 1, Issue Number 10. I thought to copy the article here as I found it one of the more chilling accounts I have read, and educational as well. Late at Night, by Alex Michael. A true story. My family has always been notorious for doing things at odd hours, and as you may well know, The strangest things always happen late at night. It was an unusually warm autumn some years ago, and at 16 years of age I had just finished a summer job as an arts and crafts camp counselor. The only thing left to do was pick up a rather large trunk filled with my belongings. Unable to fit such a large trunk inside the VW Beetle I had purchased just a few weeks before, my mother was volunteered to transport it from the mountains back to the city in the larger of the family cars. Summer camp was a very wild place for me, with staff partying every night until the wee hours of the morning. My room was near the entrance of the staff residence where all these parties took place. By late July, sleep-deprived party wimps like myself were weeded out, so I built a single mattress-sized platform in the woods and then covered it with polyplastic. Bow Valley Provincial Park, an undisturbed protected forest, was only a stone's throw away. It is there that my mother, a small dog named Willow, and myself were going to retrieve my trunk at 3 o'clock on a Monday morning. Why 3 in the morning? Well, I could say it was the heat, but it was mostly because my father had not yet been told that the car would be leaving town. There was also my adolescent fear that knowledge of the platform construction would somehow reflect itself in a summer paycheck I had not yet received. My mother had to be at work by 6:30, so we had less than an hour to complete this covert action. As we approached the highway turnoff, a sliver of the moon cast a glowing border around southwestern Alberta's Mount Yamnuska. Driving several miles along the gravel road, the camp looked deserted. Summer staff had cleared out several weeks before, and a handful of permanent staff were either taking days off in the city or asleep in cabins several miles from the summer campsite. Angling off on the side of the road, my mother left the headlights on, pointing into the trees. There was some discussion about taking the 20-pound dog named Willow for protection. However, Willow's track record for wandering off severely threatened a successful completion of the mission. Plus, very uncharacteristically, the dog named Willow now refused to get out of the car and was partially hidden under the driver's seat. Car headlights were of no value after the first few seconds of meandering through the forest. We had a flashlight, but I was having difficulty remembering the exact location. The 15-minute walk turned into a 30-minute skin-scraping bushwhack, but finally we arrived at the isolated platform, even though the flashlight batteries were now dead. I assured my mother all that needed to be done was to take down the polyplastic rain cover and carry back a mattress and the trunk. It should only take 2 trips. She was noticeably silent as we began working in the darkness. My mother began untying strings securing the poly to the ground, and I was kneeling on top of the 4-foot-high platform, stretching up to reach some tangled binder twine knots tied to a tree. A pungent smell suddenly flooded the air. My eyes moved from the knots to the tall length of plastic. There, distorted through the semi-transparent poly, was a huge shadow only about 7 feet away. With the 4-foot platform and me kneeling on top, the creature was easily at eye level. A split second later, there was an incredibly loud screaming roar. Although I know of nothing to describe it, the sound was like a peacock scream, a bear growl, and a lion's roar, all somehow combined. I can't tell you if I screamed. I can't tell you much of anything other than my eyes continued to peer through the plastic at this massive shadow. My 5'3" tall mother had somehow leaped into the air and was now up on the platform beside me. Whatever it was finally turned and walked slowly away on its long behind feet. We continued watching as each heavy step could be heard contacting the ground. There were no visible ears, just a sparse mohawk-like fringe sprouting up from the tapering top of the creature's head. From behind, the upper body appeared massive. It continued to walk upright until disappearing into the trees. We stayed on top of the platform, motionless, for some time after. Then, finally, I started ripping down the plastic. I have no idea what my mother did during the next 40 or 50 seconds, but my next memory was power walking through the forest, balancing a single mattress on top of my head with one hand and carrying the handle of the trunk in the other. I assumed my mother was holding up the other end of the trunk. With Willow still hidden under the driver's seat, it was a very quiet drive home. Late at night, they say that your mind can play tricks on you, but I am so certain. Brown bears had been in the area that summer, but I have never seen a bear walk upright that smoothly for that long a time. Or could it have been a very large, long-furred man standing over 7 feet in height? I say man because intuition tells me that the creature was a male. Could it have been a Sasquatch that night? I will never really know for sure, but you can bet that I will keep telling the story as if it were. This is the end of story number 4. Story number 5. Logan Lake, British Columbia, Canada. Nearest big city, Kamloops. The informants, a man and his wife, were not too far from me, camping in the summer of 2000, and during their stay they were experiencing some rather frightful events. The reason they contacted me was because they had come across my sighting, and because theirs happened so close they wanted to talk to me. They were camping for 2 weeks, and during this time their food was being taken and even some clothes were missing. They thought maybe coyotes or even bears, but one morning after hearing something in the campsite during the night, they woke up to find everything tossed around the campsite. Even the guy's boat on a trailer was moved a few feet. One night in particular, something hit the side window and broke it, and in the morning they found a large rock sitting there in the dirt. On another night, they said it sounded like a few people were outside their camper mumbling. Jill said it was like someone had their mouth full of food. I pictured the Sasquatches eating all their food and trying to talk to each other. After that morning incident, they cleaned up and had breakfast when Jill had noticed bare footprints just off to the side of their camper, and they said it was obvious to them by the size of the prints that the visitor during the night had to be a Sasquatch, nothing else. They said the prints were around 18 inches long. The man put his size 12 foot inside the print, and there were still 5 or so inches more in length. They told me that a couple days later they were out in the boat fishing and actually saw this thing in their campsite while they were out in the boat. Apparently it was throwing their stuff around and making a mess of things. The couple described the Sasquatch as a reddish-brown with long arms and a funny-shaped head. They believed it to be a male because of its bulk, size, and height, which they say was about 7 to 8 feet tall. I asked if it could have been a bear, and they both replied, "As God is our witness, what we saw was a Sasquatch." After describing the arms, legs, head, and all, there was nothing else it could have been. Personally, judging by their body language and the way they were trembling while talking to me, I believe them 100%, no doubt whatsoever. The older couple said they waited in the boat for a while until they were certain it was gone, and as fast as they could, they chucked everything in the camper and left the area, only packing up properly when they got to the town where they ended up staying that night. The couple were in their 60s, very clean and neat and polite. I can't see these two spinning a tale because it's been almost 6 years since that time, and they preferred not to be bothered by it. The sighting area is no more than a 40-minute car ride from me, and it's exciting because I've actually heard of another sighting in that area, but I didn't pay much attention to the person at the time, but now I'm going to try and track him down to hear what he has to say. I'm wondering if maybe there is a Sasquatch, and it could still be in that area. Tim Martindale, Merritt, British Columbia. This is the end of story number 5. Story number 6. Teapot Hill Hiking Trail in Cultus Lake Provincial Park. My name is Sanel Hodzik, And today, December 12th, 2012, at approximately 3 p.m., I was hiking with my dog up Teapot Hill Hiking Trail near Cultus Lake Provincial Park in the Fraser River Valley. The nearest town would be toward Chilliwack, British Columbia, Canada. On my way down the trail, I was changing my music on my iPhone, not really paying attention to my surroundings, when I noticed that my dog, Lila, was barking like crazy. She was about 5 feet ahead of me and staring off into the distance, so I stopped and looked ahead when I noticed something in the bushes about 50 feet ahead of me. I was so scared that I froze and just kept staring at it. After about a 10-second stare down, I switched my camera on and quickly took a picture. Meanwhile, my dog is still barking like crazy. I then picked up a rock and threw it in the direction of the thing, and then I quickly turned around and ran back up the hill. I waited about until I saw someone else coming down the hill, and I followed him closely behind all the way down. So I do believe I saw the Sasquatch or Bigfoot that day. If I could describe it, I would say he was about 8 to 9 feet tall, very hairy and big. His skin color was brownish. His face was something like a monkey or ape. I took it with a full zoom on my iPhone 4. He was about 50 yards away from me. He's in the middle rightish of the picture. Only thing I noticed really was how he was standing, looking at me. It had a long face, but bigger forehead with long hair starting from about the top of its head. Sanel Hodzik, Chilliwack, British Columbia. That is the end of story number 6. Story number 7. Letter from El Paso County, Colorado Springs, Colorado. Summer, 1991. To whom it may concern. After reading some of your stories regarding Bigfoot, I thought I would add something I have kept rather a secret for quite some years. I was a cadet at the U.S. Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs, Colorado, back in the summer of 1991. I had been at the academy for only a few weeks and was finishing up basic training when it happened. Now, the academy itself sits on the foothills of the Colorado Rocky Mountains. Basically, I could step out of the cadet area and I would be standing in the mountains. There's plenty of brush, trees, and so on to conceal just about anyone of anything you want back there. Anyhow, one night, about 9 p.m., my roommate and I were laying in bed chatting about our upcoming campout in Jacks Valley, an area just beside the academy where we did a lot of field training, when we heard what sounded like a woman screaming her head off. It was absolutely horrific to hear. What was most interesting was that prior to the blood-curdling noise, we could hear the other cadets in their rooms talking and joking. The campus was basically shut down for the night, and everyone was getting ready for the next day. I remember the ambient noise being rather loud. Then this scream came. All of a sudden, you could have heard a pin drop, it was so quiet. I turned and asked my roommate if he heard what I and everyone else had just heard. I know, what a dumb question. He looks at me and says, "Oh yeah, that's the local Bigfoot." I couldn't believe it, but of course, I heard it. He then proceeds to tell me about a buddy of his who saw a big hairy human drinking at a local lake. When it saw his friend watching it, it stood up, turned away, and walked into the forest. Of course, the next week in Jacks Valley, for me, was a very nervous affair. I was more worried about getting up at night and walking to the latrine by myself than I was running the assault course. Well, I just thought I'd add my 2 cents worth. Please withhold printing my name from this email if you decide to post it. Thank you. That's the end of story number 7. Story number 8. Lake Christie, Ottawa, Ontario, Canada. My story. I don't even know where to begin. To this day, even the thought of what I am about to tell you makes every hair on my body stand up and brings tears to my eyes. Why the tears? I don't know, but they are genuine. I have never discussed this with anyone, and hadn't planned to, but after stumbling across your site, I think I've had a change of heart. I live in Ontario, Canada. It is probably for this reason that I have never said anything until now. To my knowledge, almost all Sasquatch sightings are along the west coast on the continent and along the Rocky Mountains. I don't know how many sightings have been recorded this far east, but I know what I saw and heard on a few separate occasions. I used to work at a scout camp in northeastern Ontario. It is in a very remote location, nearly an hour's drive from any civilization, and one of the only true scout camps in all of Canada. It is surrounded by lakes and large hills of dense forest on all sides, and there are a few cottages scattered here and there around the main lake and camp that it's stationed on. Lake Christie, if I remember correctly. Although I live far away from this place, I worked there every summer from 1996 to 1999. My first experience happened in 1996. I was 16 years old. As a counselor, every 2 weeks we were moved around and put in charge of different Scout and Cub Scout groups. I guess so everyone gets a chance to work with groups of all ages. On this particular rotation, I was working with one of the senior Scout groups at the camp. As part of their last week there, they had to partake in what was called a solo night. This is where each camper is driven by one of the assistant camp directors to a remote location and left for the night with the bare necessities to survive: a sleeping bag, rations for 1 day, and 2 strike-anywhere matches. It was on this particular night that I will never forget the sounds that I heard. It was late at night in August. I'm not exactly certain of the time, and I was sleeping in my tent in the upper field, which is not exactly on the upper campgrounds, but up the dirt road quite a ways and into the bush another 5 minutes walk. Altogether, probably a 20-minute walk from the main campground. In the middle of my slumber, I was suddenly awakened by a loud, deep shrieking, squealing sound that I had never heard before. I sat up in my tent, alarmed and uncertain of what I had heard. I thought maybe it was one of my colleagues playing a trick on me and the other 2 counselors who were camped up there alone for the night, or one of the other 2 for that matter. This being a camp full of staff who are well known for their pranks, I wouldn't have put it past them. Then I heard the noise again. It was even louder. At first I thought it was a skunk being attacked by coyotes or something. I have heard that sound before and witnessed it. For those who don't know, skunks actually make a sort of shrieking, squealing sound when being mauled to death. I saw it firsthand, but that is another story altogether. Editor's note: all Mustelidae, such as wolverines, weasels, badgers, civet cats, skunks, and otters, etc., emit a loud to groaning squeal or high-rolling shriek, often sounding like a woman in hopeless distress when caught by predators or in iron-set traps. The sound can be very loud and unnerving, even from a wounded rabbit. However, this sound was much deeper. Then, just as it had come, the sound stopped. I lay awake for the rest of the night, barely moving a muscle. When morning came, and the sun was bright enough, I slowly came out of my tent and walked to the main campground for breakfast. A few minutes later, the other 2 counselors came down to the main camp and gave me a mysterious glance. Then one of them approached and asked me, "Was that you making all that racket last night? You scared poor Dave half to death." I just looked at him and said, "What racket?" with a stone-cold look. He gave me a knowing look and walked away. We never discussed it after that, and no one mentioned pulling a prank on me or the other 2 that night. Sooner or later, everyone owned up to their pranks, but no one even mentioned this one at all. It was not until months later that I realized what I may have heard. I was watching a documentary on TV about Bigfoot, and a crew hunting the evasive being had recorded what they thought were mating calls of the mysterious creature. When I heard the sounds of the recording come from the TV, the memories of that night came back to me. I quickly sat up, eyes glued to the screen, and the hairs on my neck stood up again. It sounded almost identical. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Again. My next encounter was 2 years later, 1998, in August again. It was late August, and there were no more cubs for the remainder of the summer, so the designated cub field and its cabins were vacant. So, not having much to do and no kids to watch, I decided to sleep in the cub field with the rest of the staff who had no children to take care of. The cub field is exactly that. It is a large clearing in the middle of dense forest, up yet another hill. It is probably 150 yards wide and probably 200 to 250 yards long, with a row of small cabins on either side. While I laid in bed in one of the cabins, I woke a little after 12 o'clock a.m. I don't know why, but I was just suddenly awake. In the distance, I heard what I thought was howling, but I wasn't exactly sure. It sounded kind of muffled, but I was used to that sort of thing. I looked over at one of the other counselors staying in my cabin that night, and he was fast asleep. Then, out of nowhere, I heard what I thought was someone running right by my cabin. The steps were heavy and quick. I shot out of bed, grabbing my flashlight, wondering who was running around at this hour, since everyone was supposed to be in bed hours ago. I swung the door of the cabin open and shone my flashlight in the field. I couldn't believe what I saw next. About 40 feet away, diagonally from me, I saw a large, hairy creature walking across the field very swiftly. I stood there in shock, wondering what my eyes were seeing. This thing was absolutely enormous. At first I thought it might be a bear, but then realized something. It was walking upright, on 2 legs. It was very tall, bulky, and had dark brown hair covering its entire body. Then, as if noticing my flashlight, it stopped, turned, and looked at me. I could see the yellow reflection of its eyes and its face. The face seemed to be almost half human, half ape-like, having little hair on its face, but the skin was almost the same color as its hair, a sort of light brownish color. It stood there, looking at me, and I at it, for what seemed like an eternity, but was probably more like a few seconds. I wanted to scream. I wanted to wake up the others, but I was frozen. I was caught up in the phenomenon that I was seeing and couldn't move. That's when I noticed the smell. It was such a rancid odor, I had to plug my nose to save from puking. Then the creature turned and began to continue its swift movement across the field, and in a matter of seconds, it was across the field, walked between 2 cabins, and into the dense forest. It was when it walked between the 2 cabins that I realized how tall this being was. I am 6 foot tall. Without standing on my tiptoes, I can reach approximately to the 7 foot 4 inch mark. This thing, as it walked between the 2 cabins, was taller than where the top one of the doors is. The cabins are elevated off the ground. From standing on the ground, I cannot touch the top of one of the doors. I am a couple of inches shy of it. I checked the next day. I would estimate that this thing was probably around 8 feet tall, or close to it. Again, I lay awake for the remainder of the night, my hatchet by my side. This was the scenario for many of the remaining nights of that summer before I went home. There were even sleepless nights afterwards while at home. I didn't think I was afraid of anything until that night. I tried searching for tracks the next day, but to no avail. I couldn't find anything. The next day I asked one of the head counselors if there were any large animals in the general area, such as bears, and he said, no. Apparently, there were no bears for miles and miles. I never mentioned anything about what I saw that night. I didn't want anyone to think that I was crazy. I thought I would just wait and see if anyone else mentioned something before I said anything. No one did. My last encounter was the following and my final year, yet again in August. I don't know why I went back after all of the nightmares and sleepless nights from the previous summer. I guess I thought it was a once-in-a-lifetime thing. This time, I had taken a rowboat out onto the lake with a lady friend whom I had met that summer. Yes, there are female staff at scout camps. The main beach for the camp is in a small inlet of the lake, almost like a sort of small bay, before it opens up. As I was taking her on our romantic moonlight row, I heard what I thought was somebody whistling at me. I stopped rowing. She didn't hear it, but I know I did. I looked around at the surrounding shoreline and didn't see anything. Next, I heard a splash. A little one, as if someone had thrown a rock into the water. I thought maybe another couple was somewhere along that shore. I grabbed my flashlight. She grabbed hers. We scanned the shore from the safety of our boat to see if we could spot them. We were scanning in different sections. Then I saw them. Those eyes. The yellow reflection. I focused in on them, and they had an eerie resemblance to the ones I had seen the year before. "Do you see them?" I heard her ask. Without looking away, I said, "No. You?" "No," she replied. "What is that?" referring to the eyes caught in my light. "A deer?" she asked. "Yeah, probably," I said. But I knew better. Then the eyes were gone. We then agreed that there was probably another couple out there, and we didn't want to get busy in front of other people. So I turned the boat around, and we went back to the camp. I have kept these secrets with me for 5+ years now. This is one thing I can honestly say I haven't told a single soul until now. I will never forget what I've seen and heard. Although there was no physical contact, I have been extremely traumatized from what I've experienced. All this has been put in the back of my mind until now, probably because there was a show on this Discovery Channel about Sasquatch today. Like I said before, it still makes the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. This is the end of the 8 stories. Thank you for listening.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Creek Devil. If you or anyone you know has had an encounter with these creatures, please contact us at williamjevning@yahoo.com. That's William, Jevning @yahoo.com. All communication is confidential. Join us for another program next week. And until then, keep your eyes open out there.